Welcome back. This video is a compilation of previously uploaded episodes, which you can find individually on the channel. But if you're new to the channel or would like to watch them again, then here you go. Don't pick up hitchhikers. I was going to post this in r/creepy encounters, but I think it may tread on the line with this group, so here I am. I, a 52-year-old female at the time, was traveling by car to an out-of-town job assignment. I had stopped at a popular and busy gas station to fill up the car, stretch my legs, use the restroom, and grab a snack. I was approached by a developmentally disabled woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s. She was looking for a ride to a town a couple of towns over. Her ride had abandoned her while she was in the restroom. She was a little upset. She didn't have a cell phone and didn't know any phone numbers so I could call someone for her. I checked with the employees at the store, and they said that she had been there for an hour looking for a ride because she said her friends left her while she was in the restroom. I then made the decision to do something I've never done before and offer a stranger a ride. I wasn't going to the town she wanted to go, but I was heading in that direction and told her I could drop her off at the grocery store in the next town where I would be turning off to go to my destination. The grocery store was always busy, and it was very likely she'd have an easier time getting a ride to where she wanted to go. Also, she'd be 5 miles away from where she wanted to go, instead of 25 miles, and she'd have an easier time walking that distance if she had to. This was agreeable to her, and we set off. Right away, I noticed the van following us. I tried to lose the van, but it kept pace. Meanwhile, the woman wanted to play with my phone. I told her no, it wasn't a toy, it was for work, and I moved it out of her reach. The van speeds up and starts to get closer. The woman suddenly remembers her boyfriend's phone number, and we need to call him. I can't use my phone while driving, and I was approaching the outskirts of the business district of the next town, so no cell phone use while driving signs everywhere. I told her, "We're almost to the grocery store. We can call him from the parking lot." She then becomes agitated and yells, "No, you have to take me home." I told you I can't do that. I'm not going there. It's in the opposite direction of where I need to go, and I'm expected soon. We'll call him from the parking lot. She becomes more upset and frustrated, and the van is getting closer. I pull into the grocery store parking lot. It's about 4 p.m., and the grocery store is busy. I pull up in front of the store and ask for her boyfriend's number, and she can't remember it. She won't get out of the car, she's arguing with me, and the van is pulling into the parking lot. There is a sheriff's deputy parked nearby, so I roll my window down and signal that I need to speak to him. He walks over and asks me what's going on. I tell him I met the woman, and now she won't get out of the car, and under my breath, I tell him the van has been following us. The deputy tells the woman, "She brought you where you asked her to. It's time for you to leave her car now." She slowly gets out of the car, and I ask once more for her boyfriend's number. Then she says, "You're crazy. I don't have a boyfriend. Oh look, there are my friends now." And she points to the damn van. The deputy and I share a look, and he says, "Give me your contact info. I can delay them for about 20 minutes while I check their license and registration, and lecture them about abandoning a special needs adult. You get out of here, and I'll check on you before my shift is over. And don't pick up any more hitchhikers." I left and went on to my destination. He called me to make sure I got to where I was going, and told me that they were keeping an eye on the van and its owner. He told me he also contacted a colleague at the sheriff's department in the county where I was working, and that she would contact me in a day or two. While I was on assignment there, I spoke to 2 deputies and a detective about the woman in the van. No one ever told me anything about them, but they were very interested in them. My nightmare is, one day, I'll turn on a true crime show and see a report about this woman and her gang robbing and killing someone. So, woman looking for a ride at the travel stop, let's not meet again. Creepy woman followed me around laughing at Waterpark. This happened back when I was 11 or 12 years old. It was the beginning of summer, and I begged my mom to go to the water park in the next town. She couldn't drive, so she arranged for her friend to drop me off and pick me back up after. I was a decent swimmer and had been alone a couple of times before. My mom had given me the money for the admission and a little extra to get a drink and snack from the vending machines. I arrived and got changed, putting my bag in a locker and strapping the key around my ankle. I couldn't wait to get on the slides. There weren't too many people there, as it was early evening around 6 p.m., so I got on all the rides relatively quickly. My favorite was the River Rapid slide. On this slide, you would go down small sections of the slide, splashing into small pools in between. You were supposed to use a rubber ring, but most kids, and some adults, didn't bother. No one ever worked on the slides anyway, so it was a bit of a free-for-all. I went down the River Rapid slide for the 4th or 5th time, and splashed into the first pool. I mucked around here for a bit before wading towards the next section of the slide, and I was completely alone on the slide, or so I thought. The next pool after this section of the slide was a dark and enclosed section. I liked to sit in there sometimes and relax before finishing the ride. However, this time, someone was already in there. A larger woman in her 30s or 40s lay on her stomach with her feet over the last section of the slide. Her head peeking above the water, she was cackling loudly, a hysterical guttural laugh. She looked me dead in the eyes and pushed herself down the last section of slide, still laughing as it echoed off the slide walls. I was thoroughly freaked out and waited 5 minutes before sliding down so I didn't encounter her at the bottom. Presuming it was a random freaky coincidence, I went straight back on the slide. Again, no one else was around. I rode the first section normally, before apprehensively sliding to the second section, into the dark cave pool. And I heard it again. That creepy, genuinely hysterical laughter. There she was, the same woman from before, grinning and laughing while staring at me. She again flushed herself down the slide, leaving me alone. I decided I wasn't going to ride the River Rapid slide again that visit. She petrified me. So I decided to go to the black hole next. It was a one-person slide. You're supposed to wait for the light to go green before sliding, so I figured I would be okay. I say supposed. I flung myself into the dark abyss of the tube ride. However, I heard a second thud behind me. I turned around, and in the darkness, my worst fears came true. I saw the shadowy figure of an overweight middle-aged woman following me down the slide, and once again, she started laughing loudly and hard, the kind of laugh where you can barely pause for breath, as if you've seen the funniest show or meme you could imagine. I have never been more terrified in my life. I panicked, slamming my hands down on the floor of the slide and pushing in an attempt to make myself go faster. It worked a little, but she was never far behind, cackling away. When I reached the bottom, I threw myself out of the landing strip area, grazing my knee. I ran to the changing rooms, not looking back. I locked myself in a stall and removed the key from my ankle before running out to grab my stuff, and went straight back in. I then got changed and bolted from the building to call my mom. She sent her friend to pick me up right away. So, creepy laughing Waterpark lady, let's not meet again. A creepy bicycle man in the fields. This story happened a while ago, but it still messes with my mind. Side note, I live in a quiet countryside, where usually nothing happens. I'm an 18-year-old girl who can easily walk around my hometown alone without ever being scared, because it's really safe here. Basically no crimes. So as usual, me and my dog went for a walk one evening. It was nice weather outside, so I decided to go to a nearby field. I usually let my dog out of her leash there, so it was fun for both of us. She's a nice dog, and always comes when I call for her. We get to the field and everything is going really well, and nothing seems off. Except I kinda have this odd feeling in my gut that I never usually have. The last time I had the same feeling was when I was 8 years old, and we were driving at night with my family. I had the same feeling then, and I told it to my parents. I feel like something is wrong. You should be careful. I said something like that. They slowed down because I was oddly serious at the moment. A minute after I said it, a deer came out of nowhere, and we would have crashed if we had gone by the same speed as a minute before. We were all shocked, and my mom thanked me. I still remember it like it was yesterday. However, in the field, 10 years later, I get the same gut feeling. Whatever. I think and keep going, completely ignoring it. We roll around the fields in a nearby forest until the sun starts to set. I put my dog back on her leash and decide to leave from one of the tiny paths that go through a small forest. It's not a popular way to go, but it's quick. As I'm walking along that path, I suddenly spot a silhouette in the end of the road, just before the forest starts. I think nothing of it at that point, and just keep walking. But after just a little while, I have a strong gut feeling and stare at the silhouette for a while. It's then that I notice that the silhouette is staring at me without moving. I just think that maybe they were waiting for someone, because at first, the silhouette still looked like a child's. but as I got closer I noticed that it wasn't a child, but a grown man who was difficultly riding a child's bicycle. It was a blue and green boy's bicycle. His legs were way too long for it, and his whole body looked like he was forcing himself to ride it. It was a really unsettling sight. Still, my dumbass didn't want to turn around and have a couple of kilometers wasted time. So, even though it was creepy looking, I thought, maybe he's waiting for someone that comes from my way, but every step I take he follows me with intense expression. I'm only like 20 meters away from him when he starts to do weird jumps on his bike, smiling the ugliest and most unsettling smile I've ever seen, just staring at me with wide eyes. He kinda looks like he was expecting something, and is so excited about it that he needs to jump. He looks like he's in his 50s or something, very long and thin legs and arms, bald, and that creepy unsettling smile. That's when my alarm bells went off. I glanced behind me, and no one was there. It was just me, an 18-year-old small girl with her fluffy and definitely not guard dog. I turn around and start to jog where I came from, just in case. I glanced at him in sight in relief when I noticed he wasn't following me or anything. I thought that maybe he wasn't waiting for me after all, and called myself stupid and a scaredy cat. Well, I was so wrong. My adrenaline starts to slow down again as I'm in the middle of the fields, and I still see no sign of him following me. I let my dog off her leash again, and she starts to run around. I'm nearly at the end of the field when my dog spots a rabbit or deer or some interesting thing and flies towards it. I panic because she has never done that before and yell for her. I yell plenty of times for her loudly, and she finally comes back. I'm relieved that nothing happened to her, but as I put her back on her leash, I notice something from the corner of my eye. The freaking bald long legs is biking towards me. He's not looking at the ground when he bikes, but me. Freaking out wasn't enough to express my feeling in that moment. I have never seen a human who looks so crazy. More than crazy. What surprised me the most was that he was biking through a field, and I can tell you, it's not an easy field to even walk sometimes. It has muddy ponds that you need to jump over, but that psycho just biked through them. He was struggling a lot to bike there, but somehow still managed to do it. I didn't watch for another second behind me because I started running. I ran so fast that I saw black and nearly collapsed. My lungs hurt so bad that I thought I was dying, but the adrenaline kept my blood running in my legs too. Once I glanced behind me and he was there, struggling badly to keep up his full speed on the field grounds, with that ugly white smile, and the way too little bike. After that, I just ran like crazy until I found a house, and hid in their yard without even minding that I was in someone else's yard. It didn't matter to me in that moment at all. I waited a while with my breathing stuck in my throat, but he didn't come. I was planning to yell as loudly as I could if he found me, but he never did. At some point, the adrenaline started leaving my system, and I left my hiding spot. I ran again until I reached an area which had multiple people in their yards, so I would have help if I saw him again, but I didn't. I typed 911 into my phone, but couldn't bring myself to call, mostly because I had no proof, and didn't want my parents to find out because they are overprotective, so I probably wouldn't leave my house anymore. I've been paranoid after this incident. My dog was frightened too. I guess she noticed something was really off as well. I swear to God that I will always listen to my gut when it's telling me something from now on. I'm still scared of him. I've expected to randomly spot him in some area and think about what he could have done to me. I can't forget his awful smile. I feel like he's going to jump in my window one night and do what he wants to me. I feel paranoid and helpless, and still thinking about calling the police. The Last Tram. This happened years ago, when I was a dumb teen who loved walking the city alone after dark. This took place in Eastern Europe, for context, in a city with a tramway system. On this one night, I sat in a tram station, waiting to catch the last tram home. 3 trams stopped at this station, 2 of which went where I was going. Important info for later. It was around 10 p.m., and I sat there waiting, lost in thought. I barely registered a man quietly walking up and standing by the shelter. I thought nothing of it, just someone else waiting for the tram, until I started feeling weird. The streets were quiet and dark, and there was no one else in sight, just me and this guy, and I started wondering why he chose to stand this close to me when he had so much space to avoid dealing with people. I couldn't comprehend anyone wanting to socialize this late at night, given that I was not very social myself. So I glanced at him, trying not to overthink it. He was a bald-headed, beady-eyed giant, tall and built like a bear, big belly, and big arms and legs. I was 5'2" and scrawny, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the fact that he was staring right at me, unblinking and expressionless, not even attempting to look away or act embarrassed. No, this guy wanted me to feel uncomfortable. I instantly felt weak and shaky, cold shivers down my spine. This was not normal. I realized quickly that I was not in a good situation. I couldn't miss the last tram. Walking home was out of the question, and my phone was almost dead. I was a shy kid and didn't have what it takes to scare this guy away. I knew that, but I had to at least try. I only managed to utter out a small "hi," trying my best to startle him out of whatever he was thinking. But my attempt failed in the face of his silent, threatening aura. He kept staring, no sign of intent to reply. He was enjoying this. Feeling the panic rising inside me, I told myself to stay calm and think rationally. Maybe he didn't hear me. Minutes passed. His stare continued to burn on my skin, and there was no tram in sight. Ignoring him didn't work, so I mustered the courage to speak once again, this time louder. "What do you want? Stop staring." No answer. He definitely heard me this time. I felt myself start to get angry. I didn't want to let this guy get to me anymore. I didn't want to continue to give him the satisfaction of watching me squirm nervously and pretend that his behavior didn't bother me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to start thinking. I knew what I can't do. I can't fight him off if he makes a move, and there's nothing I can say or do that will get him to stop. I don't know what his intentions were, but I knew they weren't good. If I tried to walk away, he would probably follow. I could run, but he would most likely catch up to me before I can tire him out, since his legs were much longer than mine. Even if I managed to somehow lose him, walking home through dark alleys, past the junkies and gypsies that are always sprawling about, could land me in an even worse situation. I could pretend to call someone, but he might feel compelled to act much sooner if he felt threatened. So, what can I do? The only thing I could realistically be able to do was to try to outsmart him somehow. So I started developing a few plans, depending on which trams showed up, trying to confirm whether he was just amusing himself and actually waiting for a tram too, or popped over for other, more suspicious reasons, and whether I could get any kind of help. I couldn't let him see where I lived, so if he followed me, I'd have to be prepared to employ whatever strategy available, and for that, I needed to stay rational and aware of my surroundings. While I was still thinking, the first tram showed up. It was one I could have taken home, but this one pulled into the depot right next to my neighborhood, forcing me to lead him to my home. I hoped he would board it and leave me be, but he didn't. He kept watching me carefully. I let the tram go, desperately hoping that it wasn't the last one to head home. He continued to watch, and I sensed that he wasn't quite happy with how things were going. I put up with it for another 15 minutes, trying to focus on another plan of action. I could now pretend that I needed the other tram, the one going to a different area of the city, and just ride to the next station, getting off as soon as possible so I don't end up too far and miss the tram I need. This tram showed up next. With my heart in my throat, I boarded it and sat down by the door. He got on it too, but sat himself in the back, pretty far from where I was. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking this might still go well. When the tram reached the next station, I got up and out, not looking back and hoping it was all over. But when I stepped on the pavement and watched the tram drive away, I couldn't see him in it. I turned my head slowly and was terrified to see him walking towards me, looking slightly pissed off. He stopped just a few steps away from me and resumed staring, this time with a clear hint of malice, still in silence. My vision blurred as I fought back tears of despair. He was not going to let me go. The helplessness I felt was unbearable, but I couldn't cry. I couldn't give up. I had to find a way. I had to get home tonight. The prospect of what might happen to me any time now if I didn't was becoming too real. My head was full of unanswered questions, regret, and horrible scenarios. I wanted so badly to not have to think anymore, to not have to fight back tears and stay composed, but I knew this would be his cue to enact whatever fucked up plan he had in mind. I couldn't let that happen. Then, I saw the final tram approach, the only one I could take now, and got on as quickly as my trembling legs would allow me to. When I was in, bright lights enveloped me. My mind snapped out of the nightmarish spiral of fear and allowed me a moment of clarity. I had 3 stops to figure this out. I sat down at the front and looked at the driver. He was a frail old man, blissfully unaware of my distress. Getting the driver's attention was a no-go. We passed one stop. There was no one else waiting to climb aboard. I turned around fully expecting to see that the psycho had followed me again, but I did not expect him to be sitting right behind me. He was not taking any chances. He was making sure I won't try anything like last time. I shot him a hateful glare and allowed my anger to overcome my fear. I stood up and purposefully walked over to another seat in the middle of the tram car. I wanted to make it clear I will not put up with his BS any longer, but he got up too, and slowly walked up to a spot 2 seats behind and diagonally from me. Then, sat down with the tiniest arrogant grin on his face. Already expecting it, I shot up and stood by the middle of the door instead, determined to keep him on his toes. If I stood right by the door, he won't have any idea which station I planned to get off at. He remained where he was this time, convinced that I was bluffing. After all, this was really the last tram. There was nothing else I could possibly do to escape now. He must have reckoned, so my defiance was just a funny act to him. This was my chance. I had to take the risk. It had to work. There were 3 doors on the tram, and they all opened and closed at the same time, and stayed open for around 5 seconds before closing again if no buttons were pressed, or people detected on the threshold. The next stop, the only one left before mine, came into view. The tram then slowed to a stop. The doors opened, and I made no move. 5 long seconds passed, and the door started to close. I bolted out and ran for it, reaching the back doors as fast as I could, and slamming the button to open it again. My whole body was tense with adrenaline. I waited a long, painful second and jumped back in, keeping my head low, holding my breath, and crouching behind the nearest seat. I shut my eyes tightly and exhaled slowly, while thanking the gods I didn't believe in for that button working, and wishing with all my might for him to not have seen me before I got back in. As I was waiting to hear his footsteps approaching, I pictured him frantically looking for me. Was he still in the tram? Face screwed up in anger? Head turning like a fat, ugly meerkat? Or was he catching his breath on the pavement of the last station, mad eyes searching the darkness for me? As the tram continued its loud journey, banging and clanging in sync with my heartbeat, I dared smile to myself, imagining his face when he realized he fucked up. Hand to my chest, I did my best to stealthily look around the corner, and found no one looking back. I stood up in excitement and threw myself at the foggy back window, and there he was, standing alone and victimless on that slowly fading out of sight station, watching me leave him and his vile plans behind. Giving someone the middle finger never felt so good. I made it home and told no one my story, for fear I'd be admonished for my naivety, but I was safe. I was proud of myself, and I learned my lesson. Creepy stranger, I hope the events of that day taught you to not underestimate girls, and prevented you from becoming a criminal for the rest of your life. Let's never meet again. The lady at my door. Back when I lived in the rural Midwest, I lived in a house right off of the highway. My house was right between one town and another, almost right on the county line. Our house had a big circle driveway. If you drove in the driveway, you would be going straight towards our barn. If you curved right, you could pull into our garage. If you went past the garage, you could circle around in front of the house and pull back out where you started. Our house had 2 large double doors in the front, which we rarely used. We always used the door that was inside the garage. One night, it was very late, and my doorbell rang. My husband, my 3-year-old daughter, and I were all asleep. It woke me up, and I thought I was maybe dreaming. But it rang again. I woke my husband up. He thought I was hearing things, until it rang again. It was very dark outside, but we have a dusk to dawn light, so most of the driveway is pretty lit up. Unfortunately, you can't really see out the front doors unless you open the door and look out. You can open just one at a time, or you can open both of them by using 2 latch-like things that are at the top and the bottom of one of the doors. My husband gets up and I follow him. He decides he is going to open the door. I want to call the cops, but because we live on the county line, we know it's going to be a while before they can get there. He opens the door to a girl, maybe early 20s. She looks normal except for the fact that she's been standing at my door in the middle of the night. I look past her and her car is pulled into my driveway, just off the road. Not up to the house, not around the circle. She says she needs to use the phone. She says her car battery died or something. She's not sure, but she can't get it to start. I told my husband, no fucking way. This is how horror movies start, and we offered to call the cops. She asks over and over, but I am not letting her in. We tell her we will call, and she kind of stomps off. We watch her walk back to her car, that's maybe 50 feet away. I can see her car, I can see her, so I call the cops. They say they will be there as soon as they can. About 15 minutes. They don't sound very concerned at this point, and I'm not either. I mean, it's just a girl. She probably does have a dead battery. She opens the trunk, and no lights come on. She rummages around in the trunk. Then, the driver's side door opens, and out steps a guy. Then, the back passenger door opens, and out steps one more guy. They all rummage around the trunk, with no lights on. I can't hear anything. I can't hear them talking, and I can't tell what they're doing. Then, they all get back in the car. Now at this point, maybe 5 minutes have gone by, and I am silently praying that the sheriff put his foot on the gas and gets here quick. But I know it's going to be another 10 minutes or so. They just sit there, in the car, lights off and not moving. I can't see them when they're in the car, but I know they're in there. I know they didn't get out of the car and walk past the house, because they would have had to walk right under the dusk to dawn light. I would have seen them. I think I see the driver light of smoke. That part, I'm not sure about. Then, I see something. Someone, walking towards the car from the right, coming from the direction of the barn. It's a man. I have no idea who this man is. We don't have a neighbor for at least a mile, and he's coming from the back of my property, which ends in a creek. He walks under the dusk to dawn light straight to the car, and he doesn't look at the house. He just walks to the car and gets in the back. Then, the car starts up, and they slowly back out of my driveway and head north. The cops arrive about 10 minutes later, and at this point, I am freaking out. They search around but can't find anything. They ask us if we got a license plate, but they were parked too far away. Then, tell us to call if they come back. My husband goes and gets his shotgun from the shop, and we try to go back to sleep. They never came back. I don't know who those people were, and I don't know what they wanted. Creepy people in the car without a dead battery? Let's never, ever meet again. I was being followed by a guy on crutches. One time, I was walking home from the train station after I spent the weekend at my aunt's house. It was about 11 p.m. at night and very dark outside. When I was almost home, I noticed a guy on crutches in front of me who walked in the same direction and then stopped every couple meters to turn around and look at me before continuing to walk on. Since he was walking with a limp, I quickly passed him. When I did, he stopped walking and grinned at me in a very creepy way. I kept moving, since I lived in an apartment over a burger restaurant. For a moment, I considered to ask one of the employees to walk me to the front door, because to get to the entrance to the apartment part of the house, you had to walk around the house into a dark court. Finally, I however didn't ask, because I thought, what could possibly happen? The guy's on crutches, and I didn't want to come across as childish. So I was walking through the court of our house, and wanted to pull out my keys while walking. Suddenly, I couldn't find them in my handbag. I realized I had thrown them somewhere in my travel bag because I didn't want to lose them from my handbag while staying at my aunt's and being out with her all the time. So, still standing in the middle of the court, I had to search the whole travel bag for the damn key. I was so distracted by the whole key searching incident that I totally forgot about the creepy guy I had encountered before. When I finally pulled the key out of the bag, I looked up, and the creepy guy from before was standing right in front of me, grinning. I always thought in a situation like this I'd start screaming, but instead, I couldn't get myself to make any sound at all. With the keys in my hand, I started running for the front door, opened it, and jumped inside the house. The guy, still walking with a limp, followed me as fast as he could. Luckily, due to his injury, he wasn't as fast as me. Unfortunately for me, our front door was one of those doors that slowly fall into the lock automatically, but when you try to push them in order to shut them quicker, it pressures back and stops you from slamming it. So there I was, trying to push the door into the lock, while the creepy guy was on his way to follow me into the house. Believe it or not, the door fell onto the lock right in the second he reached the doorstep. Through the glass door, we just looked at each other, both breathing heavily from the race. He looked quite disappointed. I quickly ran upstairs to my apartment and locked myself in it. Later that night, I looked outside my window and saw the same man walking up and down the road in front of my house. He stayed there for about 3 to 4 hours after the incident. I can't tell you what it is that made me not call the cops. I guess I was like, after nothing happened, what can they do about it? After that, I didn't feel safe in my home anymore because I knew that he knew where I lived. I only left my apartment when being picked up or dropped off and made sure to be home before it was turning dark every day for 2 weeks. Finally, I decided to go to the police and tell them about it. to ask whether they could keep a special eye on the neighborhood for a bit. I went to the police station, and it happened exactly how I feared it would. They took notes and said, we can't really do anything about it now. You should have called it before, but we'll make a note. A couple days passed and suddenly I get a call from another police officer who asked me a lot about what happened. He then tells me that they've been looking for the guy on crutches for months already because he molested several girls in our town, followed them into their apartments, and even stepped in front of their doors. He had been in police custody before, got out, and violated probation. He had some kind of mental illness too. The police officer told me to immediately call in case this guy showed up again. He luckily never did. It was only then that I understood the seriousness of the situation and realized that I most likely escaped an attempted assault, in some sort of way by just an inch. I, in a way, really didn't believe myself that the whole thing had actually happened before the police guy called me back. That was 5 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time, and it still gives me the creeps. Hey, creepy guy, let's never meet again. The night I almost killed a home intruder. I posted the other night about my experience being followed by a red truck. My wife and I were talking about it, and she reminded me of the following story. It's mildly interesting, so I figured I'd share it. My girlfriend and I were graduate students, living together in a 6-unit apartment building with an outside stairwell. It was an older Victorian home that had been converted into apartments. The whole street was lined with similar buildings. It was off campus, but conveniently located within walking distance of bars, a coffee shop, and several restaurants. The neighborhood had a laid-back bohemian vibe. The tenants were a mixture of college kids, young professionals, and families. The area was generally safe, but it wasn't too far from a rougher section of town. It was a Thursday night, and being the night owl that I am, it was past 3 a.m., and I had just finished the movie. I turned the TV off and went to the stairwell for a quick smoke before bed. We were in the middle of a snowstorm. The ground was covered in 6 inches of fresh powder, and it was freezing. Scary cold. I quickly smoked my cigarette and rushed back inside. My girlfriend was always complaining about me forgetting to lock the door, and, as was my habit, I left the door unlocked. I jumped into bed, and just as I was falling asleep, I thought I heard a noise. I brushed it off at first, but then I heard a creak. Probably just the wind, I concluded. Moments later, I heard the floorboards creaking. Now I was listening intently. My girlfriend felt me shuffling and asked what was wrong. I told her I thought I heard something. Then we both heard what sounded like someone stumbling into our couch. We shot up, and I yelled, "Is someone there?" No answer. The floor creaked again. This time, in unison we shouted, "Who's there?" Another noise. I quietly stood up and scanned the room for something that could be used as a weapon. Nothing. Growing up, my dad had always kept a baseball bat under his bed, and I regretted not adopting this practice. We yelled again, but there was no response. Again, but this time, from the darkness, we were greeted by a low-pitched, incomprehensible growl. I wondered if one of my buddies was playing a prank on me. That seemed out of character for my friends, especially at this hour. On a weekday night, and during a snowstorm, what I really thought was that a crackhead had wandered in. My girlfriend yelled, "Who's out there?" More footsteps. The intruder was still in the family room, but he was getting closer to our bedroom. We heard the growl again, but this time, it was followed by a gurgle, and it's Matt. We don't know any Matts, at least not any that would enter our apartment uninvited in the middle of the night. I looked at my girlfriend. I'd never seen someone so scared. If worst came to worst, I thought to myself, I know I can outrun this bitch. I hoped it didn't come to that. "Matt who?" we shouted repeatedly. After a long pause, he finally said, "Matt, I'm friends with Mike and Kelly." Relief washed over both of us. Mike and Kelly were our neighbors. I turned on the lights and walked into the family room. There he stood. A 6'2", slovenly-looking college kid. Matt was blacked out drunk. Our neighbors had hosted a pre-game party at their apartment, followed by a trip to the nearby bars. They had abandoned Matt, and, despite the storm, he had found his way back to their apartment. Their door was locked, and his phone calls had gone unanswered. His evolutionary drive to survive had kicked in, and he had sought warmth in the first unlocked apartment he could find. I told him that he scared the shit out of us and that he had to go. He stepped outside, and I quickly locked the door behind him. The next day, I learned that Matt froze to death. He'd been discovered by another neighbor, huddled next to her car under the lean to her garage. I'm just kidding. I have no idea what happened to Matt. I do, however, remember being a little concerned for him after my nerves got settled. University cult leader. I was in my first semester of university. I had just graduated college not too long ago and had entered into a program that after a while, I would come to resent. During that time, with adjusting and taking daily transit an hour and a half away from where I grew up, into the big city in order to study was somewhat of a new adventure to me. In a lot of ways, I was just beginning to sprout as my own individual and trying to carve a path for my life while simultaneously opening myself up to new experiences and a new environment. I have longtime friends who go to the same facility as me, but at the time, our schedules wouldn't always line up. This meant that a lot of my days were spent traveling back and forth and walking around the city alone. I really wanted to try and expand my horizon of experiences and friends during this period. In a lot of ways, I was really desiring to find a good community on campus that could help satiate my boredom and loneliness. I can be extremely extroverted, but sometimes I find that it takes a lot out of me to try and actually pursue and maintain friendships that haven't been established years prior. I've made friends before from different classes in college, but ultimately, I would end up texting less and less until eventually, either side would end up ghosting one or the other. Because I'm a busy guy, I don't find myself prioritizing people who I feel aren't as important to me as others. I know, a shitty thing to say, but nonetheless the truth. One day, however, I met Joel. I was on the phone with my fiance, and I distinctly remember exactly how it all went down. I was walking out of the old school Starbucks with a decaf coffee. I had one headphone in, and I was heading to class through a small stretch of underground passageway under the street that connects the school's library building to the actual building that possesses classes. As I was hastily making my way, I saw this short and stout guy, looking roughly my age at the time, with a thick brown beard and hat on. Our eyes met, and as I was about to simply walk past, he asked me something in a very charismatic and calm tone. "Hey, sorry to bother you. You look like a pretty busy guy, but I was wondering, do you mind doing a survey about religion? It's for one of my classes." To this, I regret answering, and wish I simply continued walking, but at the time, I was becoming more and more compelled by the notion of formal religious institutions and questioning my own religious faith, particularly leaning towards Christianity. "Sure," I replied cordially. He then introduced himself as Joel, and after we went through a small survey pertaining to religious affiliations and perspectives on religions, Joel informed me that a small group of students like himself were planning on getting together as a group and discussing various religions in order to gather new insights and to create a community. Of course, with the prospect of finding some new friends on campus and also exploring my own spiritual perspectives, I gave him my number after he asked for it, and he said he would contact me in the next following days. Upon entering our first meeting, I sat down in a very crowded place with seats at our school facility and was greeted by Joel, alongside a bunch of other members. They introduced themselves to me, and vice versa, and they were all extremely kind to me. We began our small group meeting, and I was a bit shocked to find out that the sole topic that we were to discuss was Christianity. I wasn't aware that we were only going to be discussing Christianity, which was against what he had proposed this group to constitute upon our meeting in the tunnel. That being said, I was so curious enough to continue, and I was accompanied by 3 other young guys of my age, who after a bit of talking with, I found out we had a lot of similar interests. Joel, who now presented himself as the leader of our study group, relayed how we would be analyzing Christianity through a multi-step program designed to unveil the holy power associated with religion to us. Since I was curious and wanted to learn more about the religion, as well as having made some newfound friends, I continued to attend this study group for the rest of the semester, in which there were a few circumstances where I questioned Joel's interpretations, and was met with hard resistance. It felt like at times my wavering belief in what Joel was saying would be met with straight dismissal, as opposed to actual conversation. I continued to brush that off, as the group that I was working with got closer. The school's club, which I was now a part of, provided me with exactly what I had wanted. We even went to a church-run event together, where I quit vaping and many individuals reported mystical experiences. Things only started to get concerning with Joel during one of our one-on-one conversations. I discussed my personal experiences and belief in my newfound religious beliefs, and all my former spiritual experiences as well. And Joel exposed me to a story and a few incidents that at the time, I definitely should have taken as red flags. For example, when he was younger, he had gone on a retreat where when he was in prayer, he said that he had begun to hear the voice of God talk to him. I questioned at first if he was referring to the voice of God as more so a metaphor, but he had reassured me that he literally heard God speak to him before. When he told me this, I became a bit unnerved. At the helm of this community was Joel, but in all other senses, I was satisfied with who I was and what we were doing together. Though I am not entirely dismissive of strange occurrences, especially pertaining to spirituality, his experience talking to God in his head came off as uncomfortable for me. He also said that the way that he would pray would involve a direct conversation and reply with God. Out of discomfort, I wouldn't prod him on what he meant by this. This, of course, was just the beginning. After the summer had ended, I had found myself in the most religiously devoted state I had ever been in. Throughout the summer, I had had a treacherous injury which made me housebound for months, and to call upon God in a lot of ways for strength. With my newfound devotion, I was elated to fall back into the community that I had nurtured and grown with throughout the last semester, relating to something that I found deep joy in. But at the first lesson of the semester, something was very different. Joel, as before, was at the helm of our study sessions, but was now perpetually interrupted by people coming to greet him and give him praise. It was so bad that we essentially sat and watched for 20 minutes before we can get on with our lesson, as more than 10 people, mostly young men our age, came to greet this man. As aforementioned, when not unnerving, he was extremely charming and gave the impression that he cared deeply for everyone. Once our lesson began, he introduced us to the second phase of the program. He explained that this was one of the toughest programs of the different levels there were, as it required more devotion and, more importantly, an emphasis on sacrifice for those who engaged. He showed us a diagram of a small stick person, and he showed that in this program, we would have to accept Jesus as the center of our life. He explained that by making our lives surround Jesus entirely, that we would not be losing something, but be gaining. He also began to go over the notion that sex before marriage is a sin, and that if we were continued with this program, we would have to make the sacrifice of giving up sex in our relationships and prove that we weren't. He said that many guys weren't able to continue because of it. I talked about this afterwards with one of the members of this group, who, not unlike me, had been in a serious relationship with someone they loved for years. In my personal opinion, though we weren't married on the altar, I knew both me and the other member felt devoted to our partners, as if we were already married in a sense, and we both expressed how Joel's behavior surrounding this was off-putting, controlling, and intrusive. After our lesson, I was a bit dumbfounded by the intensity with which he gave his speech about this new program that we would be engaging in this semester. Joel and I sat down for a few more minutes and talked, in which I expressed experiences of devotion from the summer and explained my entire catastrophic experience with my injury. He then went on to tell me that at times, he was actually able to know things beforehand. This seemingly random and strange statement shocked me. He said, for example, he was able to know something another member had before they had even mentioned it. And in the way that he described it, it sounded as if he was saying that he had some form of mystical foresight. I was a bit jarred, to say the least, though. I felt like it would be impolite to question any further. Joel then went on to tell me that he believed that if I successfully completed this program, was primed to become a teacher for the first program I had done the semester prior, leading others who would join, and that I had a bright future in the organization. In that moment, with what he had laid down on us in the lesson, I felt overwhelmed by his expectations of me. It also became evident that Joel was not a student at our facility. In fact, he was in his mid-30s and had kids. He was actually just a part of an organization that recruits people to become Christians and missionaries that works on our campus. This meant that he actually lied to me when I had first met him. He wasn't a student. There was no group talking about various religions, and his whole purpose was to convert me to make me join the organization he was a part of. At this point, school began to pick up a lot, and I was also working part-time to help support myself. As I was on the train to head back home the next week, I had forgotten that my second lesson of the program that semester was supposed to happen. So I texted Joel saying, "Hey man, I actually got onto the train and forgot about our lesson. Sorry about that, dude. I'm not going to be able to make it. I also have work later." To which he replied, "Can you get off of the train? Try and get here as soon as possible." I was a bit dumbfounded at this question. Since I live an hour and a half away, it wasn't as easy as getting off of the train and heading back the opposite direction, and he knew that. He knew that the area I live in is remote and a long distance away, I also told him that I have to work, which he had plainly disregarded. "No, man. Unfortunately, I can't come. Have a good lesson," I replied, to which he said again, "Come on, man. Just get off the train and come back." At this point, I was annoyed. Not only did I feel like he was commanding me, but that he was also blatantly disregarding the fact that I said no, and that I have work that day. So, I didn't answer him. I talked to my fiance about how I was starting to feel about the whole idea ordeal, and how I felt guilty about having feelings of wanting to distance myself from the group, while simultaneously not wanting to lose the community and friends that I had established along the way. My fiance told me that the way Joel was acting, and with regards to the things that he said, that she was starting to become uncomfortable with the whole situation. I remember sitting in bed thinking about leaving the group, and how the prospect made me feel physically ill. After all, I had been given everything I wanted in a community, except at the helm was a seemingly increasingly controlling and persuasive being who was making me and possibly other members more miserable. There was an event the following Friday that was going to be at the church, which was organized by the community. Originally, since many of my friends from this group were going, I intended to go, but alas, I was scheduled by my boss to work that day, so there was no way I was going to be able to attend. I knew that Joel would be insistent upon me coming anyways, so when Joel texted me reminding me that the event was Friday, I told him that I wasn't able to go because I had work. To this he replied, and simply said, "What? Bro, no way. You gotta come. Take off work and find somebody to take your shift. God wants you there." As I expected, he dismissed my decision, and also said that I had to be there because God wanted me there, as if he was his mouthpiece. I went on to text him again, and informed him, "No, sorry man, I cannot do that. I just got a promotion and I have to be there. I hope you guys have a great time anyways." To which he then again replied similarly to what he had before. This was my personal breaking point. He knew the importance of my financial situation, and his dismissal of my personal boundaries, as well as his commanding, made me decide to text him explaining that I was done with the group, and that I wanted to pursue my own religious exploration without the group from then on. I felt as if he was slowly, but surely increasingly controlling me, and trying to take what he could, commanding me as if he were the leader of my life in any way possible. It was even up to him if I could sleep with my fiance. He replied with a long paragraph, persisting in this sort of overly kind manner that I had to continue with the group, and that it was God's will for me to show up to this event, even though I was completely unable. He was certain that this group was meant for me, and that God had told him that this was where I was supposed to be. After I responded again telling him to stop, and that I would not, he sent me another paragraph of similar length, repeating what he would say. No matter what I would say and whenever I would say no, he would overstep my boundaries while maintaining a kind and friendly tone, in order to try and push me into submission when I had clearly said no. At this point, I said I did not want him to talk to me anymore, to which he replied, "Bro, why? Can we meet up? I want you to explain why you don't want to continue, bro, so we can meet up and do that, and I can get a better sense and we can figure out what we can do from there." Even this, I knew he was trying to elongate his chances of bringing me back into the group and continuing his reign of control. I said I didn't want to, so he asked again. I decided at that moment that I needed to block him, so I did. A semester later, I was walking down the street of my school, and as I walked by a pizza parlor, lo and behold, who came out? Joe walked over to me with one of his friends, and said that I was one of his friends to his buddy. I uncomfortably stood there, and his friends went inside for a moment while Joel turned around to look at me, and asked with his disarming gentleness, "Did you block me?" I replied, "Yes." He then said, "You shouldn't block me. That way we can meet up and talk, because I want to know why you left the group." To which I evidently was frustrated and said, "Okay," and went on my way. That night he texted me on Instagram insisting we meet up again, and I blocked him there too. In short, I'm thankful for my fiance who is the love of my life. Without her, I'm not sure I would have been strong enough to have left the group and his control. The fact of the matter is that there were other guys in that group who had absolutely nobody. They had nothing, and they were prime targets for a charismatic and controlling freak. There were members of that group who were in higher levels, so to speak, who had done all the programs, who seemed as if they were emaciated, but they had become such restricted fundamentalists that their lives and their openness to new experiences were significantly thwarted. Beware of who you let into your life, and just because somebody is nice to you does not mean they might not have ulterior motives. Also, learn to stand your ground and respect yourself. If you say no, mean it. So Joel, you controlling cult leader, let's never meet again. Laced cigarette. A few years back, when I was around 18, I entered a very rebellious phase in my life. I have always been a prodigy child, always did what I was told, never stayed out late, didn't smoke, didn't drink, scored the highest in all of my classes. All my family, my friends, and my friends' families thought I was the perfect child. But then something changed. I was on a lot of medication due to my health, and I started going through bouts of depression. I started acting up like never before. I stopped going to school. I would stay in bed all day, didn't talk to anyone, and then, slowly, I started talking to strangers online. Initially, it was just talking to them online. I would talk to a few people till I found someone interesting, would dedicate all my time talking to them, till they no longer held my interest, and then moved on to the next person. This went on for about a year. Then I eventually started meeting these people in person. Most of these meetings were sexual. I was very reckless. I slept around with more people than I'd like to admit, and regardless of my lack of concern for my own safety, I somehow never met anyone that had any evil intentions. We'd meet a couple of times, through the 30, and that was that. Until I met this one guy. I was talking to a couple of guys at that time. I wasn't in any sort of relationship, just talking around. So this guy starts talking to me and asks me about my hobbies, my interests, what I do. I told him that I don't smoke or drink, and he was shocked. I told him it wasn't that I'd never done it. I tried, but just felt like it wasn't my thing. We talked for a couple of weeks. I ended up talking about how I've been through depression, and at first, he just listened. Eventually, he started telling me I should try smoking. It would help me relieve my anxiety and stress, and I always turned it down, but he was relentless. After a month or so of talking online, we decided to meet. We had never had any sort of sexual conversation or anything, so we were just going to meet as friends. I was supposed to meet another guy, an acquaintance, for something I needed, so I suggested to the online chat guy that we meet briefly for lunch and that he can drop me off at the other guy's place. He agreed, and we decided on where and when to go. The day we were supposed to meet, we met at a local cafe, we had brunch, and then I got in his car for him to drop me off at the place I had to go. It was a good 45-minute drive, so I put on some songs and decided to relax. 5 minutes into the drive, he offered me a cigarette. I declined, but he insisted, and kept insisting until I gave up and agreed. I opened the box and there was only one cigarette in there. I told him that it was the last one, and asked if he was sure he wanted me to smoke it, since he would have enjoyed it more than I. He said yes, and I took the cigarette out. There was something odd about it. It didn't look like it was store-bought. It looked like it had been rolled by hand, but then again, I had never smoked enough cigarettes to be sure, so I lit it and smoked it. I couldn't even smoke half of it. It made me inexplicably nauseous, so I gave up halfway through and offered it to him. Instead of smoking it, he put it out and threw it away. I thought it was weird, but assumed he probably didn't want to smoke while driving. 30 minutes into the ride, I started feeling very sick. My whole body was shaking. I was extremely nauseous, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I kept telling him I wasn't feeling good, and that maybe we should go to the nearest ER instead of where we were going, but he kept telling me to relax and lay back. Everything about that ride felt off. I told him to stop the car and drop me off wherever we were. He refused. All I could think of was pulling out my phone and calling the police. When he noted what I was doing, he immediately stopped the car, and I got off. I couldn't stand, so I sat on the roadside and called the guy I was supposed to visit. He immediately drove to where I was, picked me up, and took me to his place, where I threw up all over his living room, multiple times. For the next hour and a half, I just laid on the couch, my whole body shaking and constantly throwing up. The guy brought me water and gave me some electrolytes, and kept insisting on going to the hospital, but I refused. I had no idea what I had smoked, but I was sure it wasn't just plain old cigarettes. I was scared if it had been some illegal drug, and if the hospital caught on, I would get into trouble, and I absolutely did not want my parents to find out what I had been up to. So I laid there, kept throwing up, and letting whatever this shit was get out of my system. All of these years later, I am now married to the guy who picked me up from the roadside and helped me through an insanely embarrassing time. Oh, and to that guy who laced my cigarette, let's not meet. I don't know if I would have made it out of the woods if I had done what he wanted me to do. Hello, I just came across this subreddit, and gosh, some of these are terrifying. I do have a story of something that happened to me from a long time ago, but in hindsight, it was really dumb of me, and I feel terribly dumb now. so I've always been hesitant to tell a lot of people I know about it, except for my psychiatrist. And I always apologize for long posts, so it's hard not to here. There were some other conversations that I had with this man named John, but I left some of them out for length's sake. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30 or 2 a.m. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we had gotten home, he tossed me out onto the front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn to the party, and it was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him, so I sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside of the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so hopeless and cold. I thought about knocking on the neighbor's door, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead, I decided I would try to walk to this gas station and motel so I could use their phone and try to call a girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. Ironically enough, the road I was walking on was Donner Pass Road, so the freezing cold was fitting. But anyways, a little into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I just about froze up, but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me, and this guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station, and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride. I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, "Well, good. I don't pick up hitchhikers, or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though. You just look like you need some help." He just kept driving next to me and told me that I shouldn't think that he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me, just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials, and when he offered me a ride again, I said that it would be nice, because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open and I hopped in. The radio was low. It was a little messy. The ashtray was full of cigarettes. There were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I was moving my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight-colored bandana, and some other things. He apologized, saying that it was the truck he took hunting, but it was super warm, so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him and he told me about his family. He was a young dad. He had a wife and daughter, a son and a dog. And I told him that it was like he had a perfect little family. And he laughed and said he certainly did. Then, it had sort of clicked for me to ask him if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save his battery. We were approaching the gas station, and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one," but he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach, and my heart started pounding. I started getting choked up. My eyes started tearing up as I was looking out the windows and watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak out, but somehow I murmured, asking if he would please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing, "Never go to the second location," but I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle, and how it would be a lot harder to get away with one foot as opposed to two, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground. But then again, snow is hard to get along with, especially when you're not fully clothed. I felt so dumb now too, because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared, like there was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point, and asked if I could please borrow his phone again, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started talking underneath his breath, saying, "Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look at what you're doing to me. Dressed like a slut." And other derogatory things. As he kept saying these terrible things, I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remember the pair of handcuffs. I remember seeing under the papers beneath my feet, so I used that little, I don't know how to describe it, like scoopy motion and I managed to use my feet to scoop the handcuffs up and use my heels and toes to push them under the bottom of my seat as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try to help myself, like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them. Or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so we would appear to be a drunk driver, and we'd get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night, and how if I did anything it would hurt him, but I told myself that sort of thinking sort of got me into this mess. He pulled off road where there was still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooden trees were closer to the road than on mine, and there was a small gap fully covered in thick snow, before the trees thickly picked up maybe 10 to 16 yards away. He turned off his car, and coldly said that there was something wrong with the car, and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console, and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him, because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and shouted at me to get out of the car, because we had to go check the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying, and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I've ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He stared at me in this way, like I can't even describe it to this day. I don't even know how to start. He got back in the car, and I slinked towards my window, scared he would drag me over the console. He turned off the headlights, and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at his steering wheel for what felt like years, before lighting a cigarette, looking out his window, back at me, and then back out his window. He heard me shuffle my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window, told me that if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted. And oddly enough, I was sort of thinking of running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car, then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise he could chase me, or shoot me. I'm glad I was right. I think at that point, I sort of hit the bottom of my reserve, and instead of panic, there was numbness and exhaustion. There was still an occasional hot tear or two, but I just remember being numb. I talked to a psychiatrist about this sort of feeling, and he thinks it came from my ex-boyfriends giving me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but I finally, just barely audibly, told him that my friend was still waiting for me, and asked about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children, and that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about, and he said, "I'm thinking of what to do with you." He didn't say it angrily. He just said it flatly and coldly, which sort of scared me more. I did start getting worked back up to a cry at that point, and he told me not to cry, and turned the car on, offering me some heat, but I just cried, and said I wanted to go home. Eventually he started driving, and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, he told me not to tell anyone, or he would find me. Then he told me that he was doing this to teach me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost coming to a complete stop, when he told me to get out before he changes his mind. Before he could get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down out the truck and sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming me, but then I stopped, and remembered to try to see his license plate. I turned around but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside and asked the clerk on the counter to please call the police. I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared it would be John. My fears melted away when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I had caught, the fact that he said he was an off-duty cop, just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I would be able to look, and the officer said no, and asked me if I didn't trust him. I told him of course I did. The officer then gave me a ride to my friends, lecturing me for hitchhiking, consisting of him repeatedly asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. I never heard anything back about the report that was made, so I would try to follow up, and each time I did, they never got back to me aside from the one time I was told my case number didn't exist, but that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years, I asked my friend if any weirdness or anything like that incident had happened to her or anyone up there, and she only says no. So I sort of let it go, and try to tell myself that maybe he actually was trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, It certainly worked. I never heard anything back having to do with the case. I never heard of any other odd experience up there. Maybe it was just one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself all that to help me sleep better at night. It all felt really real. Even if it wasn't real, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night. I was clinically dead for 3 minutes. Alright, I'm writing this from a throwaway account, just because I don't want it being around my original posts. First off, I would like to start with the fact that I'm not a believer, not in God nor anything else superior. I was never curious enough to look into stuff like this, and even if God exists, I simply didn't care, because clearly with multiple surgeries literally from the day I was born, I wasn't his favorite. I'm male, 27, and have had multiple heart surgeries throughout my life. Started off as a heart murmur, with an open heart valve repair when I was born. Went to have an aortic valve replacement surgery when I was 16, and a stent placed in the coronary artery near my heart at 23. I'm finally clear right now, and don't have any showing problems, at least for the near future. Surgeries had all gone great, until the third one came around. The stent placement didn't go as planned, and the balloon inflated early, stopping my heart almost immediately since the coronary artery was cut off. I was clinically dead for 3 minutes. In those 3 minutes that felt like an eternity, I felt as peaceful as ever, like coming back from a hard day at work, with nothing to do for the rest of the day, and knowing you have all day off tomorrow. I remember loving the feeling, but not seeing anything. Not black or white or something like that. Just nothing. Like a transparent background that goes on and on and on. Just as I was getting used to this feeling of laziness, the voice of my grandpa who had passed away in 2018 came around and told me, "You shouldn't get used to it. You're not staying long." Immediately after that, I woke up in the hospital bed with my mom right next to me, calling for the doctor to come. He explained the situation to me and how I was dead and they were literally about to cover me with a bed sheet when a pulse popped out of nowhere. But I wasn't surprised at all, like I already knew what happened. I never had the guts to tell this to anyone, since they would just call me crazy. And frankly, I would call me crazy too if I heard this from their POV. 4 years have passed and I'm still wondering every day how this happened. Was it an actual miracle? Was it hallucinations from anesthesia? Or am I just crazy? Nice creeps in my area. I was writing this in r/vent. Then I said to myself, this is some fucked Let's Not Meet content. This is going to be a long one, so sorry in advance. Also, English is not my first language, so grammar. For a bit of context, I need to explain how transportation works in the area where I live. So where I live, the public transportation is absolute shit. There's only one not very reliable public bus, and it is a long way walking. So the people in this residential area came up with a cab sort of system, where you pay by the seat. So one of these cabs fit up to 4 people, and a little under a year ago they decided to identify these cabs with a sticker, with a number that states the car is part of the cab line. Also, the drivers have to have an ID that has to have the cab line info. Now on to the story. A couple of times these men have tried to give me a ride, and I do my best to ignore them, but sometimes it's a little bit scary. The part of the residential area where I live is a little bit isolated, so not a lot of cars or people go through there, and I have to walk alone from my house to the cab line/bus stop. On one occasion a couple months ago, I was walking from my house to the stop, and I was wearing headphones so I wasn't paying that much attention. That was the first mistake on my part. A car pulled up over next to me. This wasn't all that strange because I had been using the cab line for a while, so when they see me they pull over so that I don't have to walk all the way to the stop. The driver said, "Hey, are you going to?" and the place of the destination. I said yes and got inside the car without checking the windshield for the ID number. That was the second mistake on my part. Here's where the alarm started going off in my head. First, the cars in the line tend to be older cars with no AC, and this was a newer car, and when I got in, he locked the doors and turned on the AC. At this point, I finally realized this wasn't one of the cabs, but a complete stranger. He began asking me things like my name, exactly where I lived, and other personal things. I responded very vaguely with my heart beating really fast. I was starting to panic, so I texted my friend my location and told him to call me ASAP. At this point, we were close to the destination, but this guy was not slowing the car down and was about to pass a stop. Then the call came through and I started to talk to my friend like he was my boyfriend. "I'm almost there, wait for me and we'll go, okay?" My friend was really confused, but when the man heard my conversation, he suddenly stopped the car saying, "Sorry, I was so entertained talking to you that I almost passed the stop. Maybe we could see each other again." Here he unlocked the car and I bolted out, barely saying anything. After that day, I became more aware of my surroundings, and I tend to only get inside the cabs and the stop, unless I can clearly see the ID of the car. A couple of my friends said that I was overreacting, but it still scared the shit out of me. Then today comes. I was walking from my house to the stop, no headphones in at this time, and when I'm halfway there, a car starts driving slowly next to me. I keep on walking, and the older man that was driving starts talking to me. "Are you Alicia's daughter? Do you live around here?" I responded no, I'm not, and kept on walking. He insisted, saying that he was a neighbor and that he could give me a ride. I replied again that I wasn't and that I didn't want the ride. Mind you, my mom wasn't called that and has been dead for over a decade. Also, my grandma that people sometimes confuse to be my mom is not called that either, but he kept insisting. So I began walking faster, approaching the stop where there were more people. At this point, the man became angry and started yelling, saying that this is the last time he would be nice to me and offer me a ride. Then he sped up and left. Finally, I got to the stop to get inside a cab that left me in my destination. When I got to work, I told my boss and she said, "Thank God you kept walking. You could have been kidnapped." Well, yeah, that was my morning. I really need a car. To both the creeps that maybe wanted to kidnap me, or who knows, let's not meet. Then Sheppard. There are scratch marks around the door handle. That's not. There are scratch marks around most door handles. Shaky hands, wear and tear, random chance. If you go and look at your front door, there will be scratch marks around the handle. These aren't like that. My wife thinks it's the local kids. Thinks they keyed her car. Thinks they fucked up our door. Thinks they shoved our bins over to make a mess. She doesn't think they killed the neighbor's cat. She blames that on a wild animal. We got married over the summer, about 4 months ago now. Happiest day of my life. We went on our honeymoon. Nothing crazy, nothing big. Just a little cottage in the hills, cozy. It had a hot tub, and these big iron gates that separated you from anything else. A small river, and a few dozen semi-wild sheep. We actually had a hell of a time getting there. No signal that far out, so we couldn't download the instructions on how to get the key and... Not important. Sorry, I'm rambling. I haven't been sleeping well. We were told there was a dog, not like a pet dog. An old sheepdog who refused to come inside. Long as we left the sheep alone, we were told it would be fine, but we shouldn't get too close. The last people who rented the place said it looked sick, and we should leave him to have his final peaceful days. A tiny note at the bottom saying to make double sure we closed the gate, because he would sometimes get a little aggressive, and it was best to keep him off the property proper. The first night was bliss, married life, not gonna paint you a picture. The second, we spent a few hours in the hot tub. It was outside on a balcony thing, and we could look out over the sheep. They were, doing sheep things. My wife pointed up the hill to the tree line, and we could just about see something pale and skinny in the darkness. Sure looked like a sick dog. On the third day, we needed supplies, and I know for damn sure that I shut that gate, but it was open when we got back. A sheep was in the middle of the driveway, looking around in that, sheep way. We left it alone. It was pretty much wary of us, but it wouldn't leave, so we left it alone. That night the dog came for it. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't. He was mangy, bald all over except for thin strands of greasy hair. His legs were wrong. His body was wrong. The way he turned and looked at me through the window, like he knew I was watching. And the way he put a finger up to his lips was wrong. I'm not crazy. I thought it was a nightmare. Too much cheese before bed. Something, normal. I made extra sure to close the gate that morning though. Just a little thing. And I didn't tell my wife. The thing was pretty clear about that after all. I wonder, looking back on it, if I should have. I saw him 3 more times. The first was in the evening of the 4th day. He was squatting in a tree, up the hill, surveying his flock. Just a shadow, really. A gangling silhouette. The second time was on the last night. I saw him out the window, sniffing at the front door. He had a handful of trash, long rocks, a few sticks, a can lid bent in half. He put each one against the lock and turned it before trying to handle, like he'd seen people do with keys. The third time was as we drove away. I don't think we hit the sheep. I really don't. But he did. I saw it in his eyes. It's taken him months to find us. But now there's scratches around the door handle and things missing from our bins. My wife's car has a big scratch down one side, and the neighbor's cat was found on our welcome mat, missing its face. I only have one excuse. I haven't been sleeping well these last few months. Also, I forgot about the spare key. Never going back to that lake alone. I have several stories to share that fit the Let's Not Meet category, but I'll start with the most recent. Yesterday, I took my son fishing. He wanted to go to a nearby lake that we haven't been to in quite some time. It's not known to be a great area. For some background, last time we went, about a year ago, a car drove by and screamed nice sass at me while I stood there with my young son. This kind of garbage behavior is unfortunately expected in the area. It's also known to be a late-night hookup spot, as well as a late-night drug deal location. Due to the lake's reputation, I had made a deal with my dad that I wouldn't be there past 4 p.m. without him. On to the story. My 12-year-old son and I pulled up to our favorite fishing spot, a small pond on the opposite side of the road as the lake. Almost immediately, an older gentleman approached us, asking if there were fish in the pond. I replied that we had just gotten started, so nothing yet, but that we have caught fish in the pond on plenty of other occasions. He thanked us for the information and returned to his spot on the other side of the road. About 15 minutes later, another younger man approaches the older man with a dog. I can see and hear them chatting, but they've made no move to involve us in their conversation, which I'm glad for. I just want to enjoy a day with my son. Unfortunately, the water in the pond was incredibly low and murky, and I could tell we weren't going to have any luck. I tell my son to pack up and we'll try another spot on the other side of the lake. As we begin packing our gear into the trunk, the younger man yells over, "Sorry if my dog and I ran you off." I tell him it's no problem, and we were simply moving to a better fishing spot. He then starts telling me about how nice it is to see a mom with her kid fishing, how you don't see that very often. I get this a lot, so I'm pretty used to it. We have a short conversation about it as I pack up, and I then move towards the driver's side door to depart. Before I can leave, the younger man starts up another conversation, this time asking me how old I think he is. This feels strange to me, but I'm nice to a fault sometimes, so I answer his question. I tell him how I'm a horrible judge of age, but maybe 25? He tells me he's 38, and I'm too kind and I laugh it off saying something like, "I work with teenagers, so they always guess me well above my age, just to be mean." He asks where I work and I stupidly tell him my city. Turns out he lives there too, and starts going on and on about how he got a free apartment on such and such street because his baby mama kicked him out of their house. I think he was talking about some kind of government assistance program. Weird flex, but okay, man. At this point, I'm standing by the car door with my hand on the handle, and my son is already in the back seat. This guy can't take the hint and starts telling me about how awful his baby mama is, and how women are supposed to be submissive, quiet, and do what they're told. He specifically said, "I mean, it's cool that you can bait a hook or whatever, but you're still a woman." Now my alarm bells are blaring. This guy struck up a conversation by commending me for doing a typical dad thing with my kid. Now he's putting me down for the same thing. He's gone from being overly friendly and complimentary to agitated and ranting. I should have been rude and got in the car and left, but I've unfortunately been conditioned, like many women, to be polite even when we're uncomfortable. Instead, I start making comments in the hopes that he'll see that I'm not some meek, submissive woman who's going to agree with him. After all, I'm a tatted up chick with an eyebrow and 2 lip piercings. I don't exactly look like a submissive little housewife. I guess I was trying to make him just as uncomfortable as he made me, in hopes he'd leave me alone. After he says women shouldn't be loud and opinionated, I tell him, "Oh, well, you wouldn't like me at all." He tries to backpedal by saying, "I mean, it's okay to be loud, I guess, but don't try that with your man, you know?" I say, "My man doesn't tell me shit. I do what I want." This kind of back and forth goes on for a while, before he finally shakes his head and says, "I just don't understand what kind of woman would act like that." I reply, "A strong one." As soon as the words left my mouth, the older gentleman yells from his spot on the bank, "Yeah, say that again, honey." This distracted the creep long enough for me to hop in the car and lock the doors. I still don't feel safe enough though. Unbeknownst to the creepazoid, only 2 of my car doors actually have functioning locks, but at least they're the 2 on his side. I put the key in the ignition and turn. No dice. Nothing. Of all the times for my car to act up, it chooses now. Panic now has set in. As I repeatedly try to start my car, I can see him out of the corner of my eye. He's taken notice of my car troubles and is trying to get my attention. As he takes a few steps towards my car, the engine finally roars to life and I peel out of there. Only then do I let my composure crumble and have a long talk with my son about what just happened. To the older gentleman who took notice of my discomfort and provided a distraction, I'd gladly meet with you again any day. To the younger misogynistic creep, I don't know if I was actually in any danger from you, but my gut said I was. Let's never meet again. Oh, and to my dad, I'll make you a new deal. I'm never going back to that lake alone again, regardless of the time of day. I was nearly kidnapped at the beach when I was a kid. So when I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7. This was the mid-90s. We took a family trip to the beach in Florida. We were staying in a beach house a short walking distance from the beach. We went to the beach and I was supposed to stay inside of my mom, but I wandered off way down, and before I knew it, I was lost. A lot of the houses looked the same, and I wasn't sure which one was ours, plus I couldn't see my mom anywhere. It had started to rain, so I went to a path that I was pretty sure led back to our house. Only it didn't lead to a house at all, but instead to a parking lot. There was a big dirty van parked there. It was the only vehicle around. I was about to turn back when I noticed an overweight woman with brown hair, a hot pink tank top, and those big clunky thick glasses that were so popular in the 80s, waving and smiling at me from the passenger seat of the van. She said something like, "Oh my, it's raining. Where's your mommy? Let us take you to her. It's dangerous to be out here in the rain. You could get struck by lightning." She was very friendly, almost overly so. In the driver's seat was an overweight man without a shirt on, a heavy gray chest, and some clunky looking gold chain. He was wearing yellow tinted Elvis shades and staring at me intently. He was also smoking a cigarette, which I knew was bad. The woman stepped out of the van and kneeled down to me. She asked how old I was. When I told her, she gleefully remarked, "Oh my, we have 2 boys your age at our house. You should come over and spend the night. We got movies, Nintendo, and in the morning we got all types of cereal." I had been taught all about stranger danger, but at this point in my life, no adult had ever given me a reason not to trust them. The lady continued talking about stuff, like how the boys have go-karts and they like to drink chocolate milk. She made it seem very enticing for a 7-year-old kid, and at this point I trusted her. I mostly liked the idea of getting to play with some kids my age. Then I remembered that I needed to ask my mom first, so I told her this. She told me that that was no problem, that they lived just up the road. My mom wouldn't mind. It started raining harder, and she opened the sliding door of the van and said something like, "Let's get you out of this rain and go find your mommy." I knew logically that I shouldn't do this, but the lady seemed really nice, and I was desperately wanting to get out of the rain. As I walked to the open door of the van, I noticed an awful stench that almost made me gag. This set off alarm bells in my head that something wasn't right. There were cigarette butts all over the floor. I looked up at the man, who was not only staring at me with this menacing glare, but he had this really creepy toothy smile, and his teeth were stained dark yellow. I could pick up on a very fucked up vibe from him. I knew now that I should run, but the woman was ushering me to hurry to get in. Her demeanor had changed. She was being demanding and trying to literally push me into the van. She sounded angry and said, "Get in already," in a tone that was the complete opposite of how she had sounded before. I jumped to the side and started running as fast as I could. The woman managed to grab my arm or wrist, but somehow I was able to break free and run back to the beach. I think she tried to chase me, but like I said, she was very overweight. I made it back to my mom, who was freaking out. I tried to explain what had happened to me, but I don't think that as a 7-year-old, I was able to convey the gravity of what had happened, and I didn't fully understand it myself. The Man with the Hedge, Shears. It was 2018, back when I lived in the suburbs of Paris. I've been playing Pokemon Go since it released, and I used to go out at night to play, always with my best friend on a voice call. It was a night like any other. Following my usual route, it was around 2 a.m., and I had already covered a good 2 kilometers. I found myself 1 kilometer away from my home, standing near a Pokestop, catching what I could while talking to my friend, just like every night. It was a residential street with a few streetlights, but quite dark as there was a field just behind it. After about 5 minutes, I noticed a man in his 30s on the opposite sidewalk, just a few meters away from me, holding hedge shears in his hand, and there was a pile of branches at his feet. I thought the man was just trimming the branches of his tree. However, when I described the scene to my friend, he said, "You should leave right away. No one does gardening in the middle of the night." Despite my friend's warning, I was so focused on Pokemon Go that I wanted to capture all the Pokemon before I was leaving, so I stayed. As I looked at the man, I realized he wasn't cutting any branches. He was only staring at me. He would occasionally move and hide behind a parked van nearby, while spying on me through the windows. However, he knew very well that I could see him, and I began to feel scared. Despite my friends pleading me to leave, I still hadn't caught all the Pokemon, so I hesitated to go. The man continued his strange behavior, crossing over to my side of the street and hiding behind some bushes while staring at me. Then he went back to his pile of branches and just stared at me again. Finally, I had enough. I decided to leave. I walked normally towards my home, trying not to show any fear. I had a straight path back home. My friend on the call asked me to check behind me in case the man was following me, and indeed he was, still holding the hedge shears, about 10 meters behind me. I then made a left turn instead of going straight. Even though it made my way longer, I wanted to make sure that he was following me and that it wasn't a coincidence. But he continued to follow me. I picked up my pace, taking snaps just in case something happened. When I reached the end of the street, I was out of breath but safe. There was no one behind me. I entered my home feeling relieved. Suddenly a white car pulled up in the front, stopped, and the driver's window rolled down. It was the man with the pruning shears. Now he knew where I lived. I rushed inside, locked everything, grabbed a kitchen knife, and waited until someone woke up so I could go to bed. There were no further incidents. Nobody believed me, so we checked the surveillance cameras at home, and unfortunately, I was right. If my car door wasn't broken, I don't know what would have happened. Some backstory to this. This happened 7 years ago, when I was just a little more naive and 30 pounds lighter. Still just as short though. It was a week before Christmas, and I was finishing up my shopping. My mother, aunt, and Nana were all pretty big lottery people, so I tend to get them scratch tickets and season tickets as gifts. I don't gamble really, so it's my one time buying them in a year. I always go to the same place down the street from me, and I wouldn't say I live anywhere dangerous. Not gated community level, but like a solid, children can walk around alone in the dusk out of 10. Now, I had an old Saab that was the classic, no one can drive her but me level of finicky. Sometimes, she just wouldn't start, unless you held the brake, shifted through all the gears, went to park, pushed really hard and turned the key. The roof needed to be manually put back up if you put it down, and just a lot of wonky stuff. My brother had broken the handle on my passenger side door right before this, after picking him up from scaring children at the hospital, so you couldn't open the door at all anymore. To get to the passenger side, you were either Dukes of Hazzarding it, or going through my side. So it's Christmassy, a bit of snow and sludge, but pretty normal day. I go to the gas station to get the tickets, cash only, so enough money to make my purchases in hand. There were a few people behind me in line, and a few were playing Keno in the sitting area. There's one wiry guy behind me on the side of the line, but I didn't notice much, other than he was a little closer than I personally would have liked. I make my purchases, several $20 scratch tickets, and a couple year-long season tickets, adding up to just over $400. I pay the cashier and head over to my janky little Saab, sit down, close my door, don't lock it, and begin to count and organize my change and everything. Not even 35 seconds later, the wiry man comes out and walks by my car. As he does, he stalls for just a second and tries my passenger side handle. It doesn't work, and just makes a clunk, as the handle is sort of free moving and doesn't connect to any mechanic stuff at this point. My heart dropped and my stomach got sour. My body knew to panic, but my head hadn't caught up. He immediately keeps going, walks out of the parking lot and down the sidewalk. Until I thought about it later and told some people, I didn't even consider that the man was probably going to try and rob me, or worse. I now very religiously follow the 45-second rule, and am a lot more vigilant Christmas shopping. Creepy encounter while babysitting. G'day everyone. This is something that happened this past Friday while I was babysitting. For a little bit of context, I'm a 21-year-old woman, a college student, and I've been babysitting since I was 14. I'm not an expert on literally anything. However, over the years, I have learned caution and resilience. At age 15, I took babysitting classes at our youth center, as well as a female self-defense course. I babysit at least once a month for this one family. I like them, because they pay me more than my usual hourly rate. They have a big house with internet that I can use to do my homework, and the two kids are surprisingly well behaved and compliant. The two parents have a monthly ritual of going out at around 5 p.m. and returning a little after 2 a.m. I'm always offered to sleep in the guest bedroom or stay until morning, but I usually just stay awake and abuse their satellite TV, then leave when they come back. The house is in a nice neighborhood without a whole lot of neighbors, very quiet. Also, their house is armed with an alarm system that I have to code to, and can arm and disarm it through my phone. That'll be relevant in a little while. I always take them for pizza at this place that has like an arcade. I do this so they can tire themselves out and go to bed early. Plus, the little girl that I babysit is also on a mission to win a family of stuffed animals from the prize store. So I'd be the world's worst babysitter if I didn't guide her in that pursuit. If anyone may be wondering for whatever reason, after Friday night, she only needs a daddy stuffed animal before her collection is complete. Go girl. Anywho, I'm rambling. I was sitting at a table and watching them play in the ball pit, while also texting on my phone. This couple came over and sat at the same table as me. It was a long table with parents scattered here and there, so this wasn't alarming. The couple looked normal enough. Both were probably in their mid-20s, possibly a little older. They talked to each other, But then the guy asked me, "Are you the one babysitting Dr. So-and-so's kids?" So the parents of these children are both doctors. In the specific region that we live in, this would be common enough information, but I still chose to answer their question with an irrelevant statement. "I wonder what they use to make the pizza here." Yeah, I know. I'm a master of deception. I deserve an award for my performance. However, they seemed to see right through my clever ruse. They started making weird comments. They talked about the kids' parents. They commented on the daughter and how they wondered if she would look as pretty as their mom. Okay, my dudes. I don't know if that was intended to be creepy, but I'm just going to be safe and pretend it was. Then the woman says to me, and I quote, "Do they really let you dress like that while watching their kids?" She motioned with her eyes towards my shirt, which was admittedly a little tight, though aside from a little bit of a bosom crack, not revealing. I have a thin frame and a large chest. It's 90 degrees in my region of the US right now, so it's not like I can wear a hoodie, and my tits have a Crips and Bloods type relationship with any kind of shirt that has buttons. I saw that as my cue to go get the kiddos and bring them to their prizes so that we could bounce. After some very thought-provoking philosophical debating, they both got their prizes and we headed back over to the house. So fast forward a few hours. Both kids are bathed and put to sleep. I delivered a heartwarming rendition of Goodnight Moon and read a very spooky chapter of The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. Then, tucked them into dreamland. It was around 9 p.m. I was caught up on homework and was just watching TV when I heard some movement on the porch. I didn't think much of it at first, but the doorknob started rattling violently. I initially started moving towards the front door to see who it was, but miraculously, I remembered that it was late at night. I was home alone with 2 kids, and I very much wanted to live. I turned to grab my purse, which is where I keep my taser. As I'm moving, the back door starts rattling as well, and was accompanied by some banging noises. That's when I remembered that I hadn't enabled the alarm system after returning. Now, if this was a horror movie scenario, of course the alarm wouldn't have worked, and the intruders would have made their way inside. I hate to disappoint you if you were expecting something more exciting, but I enabled it again quite easily with no incident. I ran upstairs, grabbed the 2 kids, and put them in their parents' room inside the walk-in closet. I still hate that I scared them. When I gathered them up, I gave no context as to what was going on. I didn't want to tell them that someone was trying to break into the house, but in the process, the fear of not knowing seemed to be worse. I instructed them to stay there and stay quiet, to only open the door if they hear me talking to them. Then I locked the bedroom door, which is the only door on the upstairs floor that locks. I sat there with my taser out, and I hit the panic button on the phone app. Several minutes went by. Then I got the notification through the app that the alarm system was disabled. I planned on calling 911, even though the panic button already took care of that, but I found it more beneficial to arm it back. Then it disarmed again, so I armed it again. Then it disarmed once again, so I armed it once again. By this time, I could hear what sounded like 2 sets of footsteps walking up the stairs. Good job, girl. You locked yourself inside with 2 potential assailants. I was holding it together for the sake of the kids, but not too deep inside. I was scared to death. When I heard the footsteps get near the door and saw the knob twisting, I took a deep breath and pulled the trigger on my taser, just to let them know that I was armed, though it realistically wouldn't do much good. I informed them through the door that the alarm was triggered, and the police were on the way. Thankfully, I was greeted by a familiar voice. My name, it's Doctor. His name, you're safe. I opened the door, ran into their arms and started sobbing. I hadn't realized truly until it was over just how scared I really was. The kids came out. When I enabled the alarm on my phone, they both got the notification from the place they were at. Within the app, you have the option to view the porch cameras as well. When they got the notification that the panic button was activated, they saw through the camera that there were people on each side of the house. 1 man, 1 woman. When the alarm kept disarming, that was them trying to get into the house. A police report was filed by them, and I gave a statement mentioning the 2 weirdos that I had met earlier that day. Even though there was really no evidence that would directly point to them, camera footage didn't give positive IDs of their face either. So yeah, I was scared. I'm getting over it now. I'm just grateful that the couple that I was babysitting were close enough to make it to me. I hate to say it, but I find the police response time to be terrible. I'm currently back in my own apartment an hour away. I checked in once to see how the kids were doing, and they're holding up fine. I'm just glad they had the proper protection in their home, and that this didn't end up to be any worse. The smiling parking lot creep. This happened to me last summer, and it still gives me the chills to think about it. That day, I went to the thrift store with my boyfriend, and we were heading back home. I suggested we pick up some sushi for dinner at our nearby grocery store. As my boyfriend works night shifts, he was already feeling tired, and I suggested I go to the grocery store while he goes back home. We live in a busy part of our city, where the mall, library, city hall, restaurants, and major stores are all a couple minutes away from our home. Not to mention, I live in a relatively safe city with little crime, so I was more than alright going by myself. Now, I truly wish I hadn't. As we parted ways, I was walking through the parking lot of the grocery store when a stocky man about 6'5", probably in his early 40s, approached me. With a wide smile and wider eyes, he said, "Wow, you're stunning." I simply thanked him and then tried walking away. He cut me off saying, "I have never seen someone as beautiful as you before." I was immediately filled with dread. I looked back hoping my boyfriend was still in sight. No luck. It may seem like an exaggeration to be wary of a person right off the bat, but having read/watched true crime and horror stories for years, coupled with having extreme social anxiety and being a smaller woman with zero fighting skills, I have only sided with caution. Not to mention, with his eyes and smile, he honestly reminded me of a buffer Art the Clown from Terrifier, minus the clown costume and lack of talking. The man roped me into a one-sided conversation, asking me my name and how old I was. I gave him a fake name and told him that I was 19. He laughed and said, unnaturally excitedly, "That's good. That means you're a true woman now." What the actual fuck? My boyfriend later told me that I should have lied and said I was under 18, as this may have made the man uninterested. From the red flags I got from the man, I seriously doubt that. He then stuck his phone out, asking for my number. I refused, saying I had a boyfriend. "And? I just want to talk to you." I repeated that I had a boyfriend. It was unnerving how his smile never wavered, despite showing that I wasn't interested, like he wasn't understanding, or he just didn't care. He sounded confused, but still grinning. He stepped towards me and asked, "So you don't want to cheat on your boyfriend?" As if to say, "What do you mean you don't want to go out with a scary-ass man that's doubled your age?" Speechless, I stepped back and gave pleading looks to the people walking in and out of the grocery store. After the last time I refused, his smile suddenly dropped, while he placed his hands on my back, saying now in a cold, firm tone, "Come on, I have a nice car I can drive you in. Let's check out one of these restaurants." Seeing a person's entire demeanor change like a flip of a switch was something I only saw in movies and TV shows, and seeing it in this situation fucking terrified me. Going into panic mode, I somehow managed to find the courage to push myself off of him and almost shouted, "Sorry, I really have to go buy my groceries." Noticing that people were staring at us, his sick smile reappeared and said with a low voice, "Alright then, I'll see you later." I practically ran into the grocery store with so much relief. I glanced back, hoping to see him get in his car to try to get his license plate number, only to see the man just standing in the middle of the parking lot, leering at me. I called my boyfriend in the store, but it kept going to voicemail. I figured he was sleeping, and I was seriously scared to walk back home. I managed to calm myself down in the store, figuring the man must have been long gone, yet I was on high alert the entire walk home. It was starting to get dark, but I figured if I just stayed cautious and walked quickly, I would be fine. I couldn't be more wrong. When I was approaching the crosswalk that led to my street, I heard a car pulling up to the sidewalk, followed by a sickeningly familiar voice barking, "Hey, hi, hey, hi." My heart dropped into my stomach. I glanced sideways at the car. With his unmistakable, now malicious-looking grin plastered on his face, the man's upper body was leaning out of his car window, as if he was trying to reach out to me. He tauntingly called out, "So where's your boyfriend?" While cackling. From everything I've learned from true crime and horror stories, I figured it was best to not acknowledge the man, my mind racing while trying to appear composed. I knew I couldn't lead him back to my house, and turning back to go to the mall or stores may have given away the fact that I was terrified and trying to escape. Bless whoever designed my neighborhood, as the city's rec center was conveniently next to my complex. I ignored him and casually crossed the street, quickening my pace as I headed into the rec center. I tried not to look back, scared that I would see the man running up on me, with his wide grin, but I made it into the rec center, and finally looked behind me. I assumed the man would have followed me in, or waited for me in his car. Instead, he sped away, down a street opposite from my house. With so much relief, I called my boyfriend, who woke up to my call. I was on the verge of breaking down, but I managed to fill him in on everything. He rushed to the rec center, helped me calm down, and we walked home. My boyfriend asked if I got the man's license plate number, to which I felt like a fucking idiot. Not only was it too dark, but I was so consumed with fear for my own life that it didn't even cross my mind at the time. At the very least, I called the police, giving them a description of the man and the make and model of his car. They said that they would do what they could, but I haven't heard back from them. I haven't seen the man since, not in person at least, but I still see that man's smile in my dreams, haunting me for countless nights, plaguing my mind. Thinking about the sadistic glaring look he had in his car reminds me that he was overjoyed to realize that I was alone and vulnerable, that my seemingly safe city isn't as safe as I thought. At the same time, I feel so grateful that the man never found out where I live, but for all I know, he could be lurking around, trying to harm other women like he tried to that night he almost trailed me home. For mine, and for the women in my city's sake, I hope I don't have to find out. My friend claimed she was a witch and tried to kill her parents. These events happened over several months in 2016, when me and my sister, then 16 and 14, first moved into our most recent apartment complex with our mother. We now call it the apartment complex from hell, because there were many incidents like this. Admittedly, we were still into the hoverboard craze then, and would ride them around. This is how we met Savannah. She was our age and lived in our building. She asked to hang out, and we were happy to hopefully make new friends, so we said yes. We hung out outside the complex at a little park area. It got dark and we started making up ghost stories. Turns out, she liked creepy paranormal stuff like we did. Note, I did not actually believe in this stuff and still don't. Every time I reference the paranormal, it is hyperbole. As we were walking home, the light in one of the apartment hallways flickered, and I jolted and said it was a spirit trying to communicate with us. Savannah made up a flash once for yes, twice for no system to communicate with the spirit, and we messed around a bit. We thought it was just harmless fun. The next day, she runs over to us excited. She informs us that the spirit we had met last night and told her its name was Kieran and that it meant light, so it all made perfect sense now. We asked how she knew, and she said she went back later that night alone to talk to it. This was the first time it occurred to us that she might have really believed in this stuff. Our aunt had given us an old Ouija board as a joke the year before, and we thought Savannah might like it. Savannah lit up and said she wanted to try to talk to Kieran. So we huddled in the hallway connecting the apartments and put our hands on the board. We kept getting random letters that didn't make sense. But soon, Savannah's questions were directed to Kieran. We felt her moving the planchette and called her out, but she got mad and said she'd prove it. She took her hand off of the planchette and it no longer moved. She just huffed and insisted it wasn't her. Over the next few weeks, we did mostly normal stuff with her, but she kept talking about the ghosts and Ouija boards until we broke down and played it again. This time, we were introduced to a new ghost, Evan. We knew it was Savannah moving the planchette, but we were curious about the story she was making, so we let her follow through. Evan was a ghost, or demon rather, about our age, who wanted free from a greater demon controlling him. That greater demon's name, Kieran. Savannah's parents called her inside and conveniently, Evan had to go too. He told us he'd protect us against Kieran, especially Savannah. Savannah commented on how cute that was for him to offer. A few days go by normally, but then Savannah's back to tell us she has a boyfriend. We're happy for her until she tells us his name is Evan. We're wondering what the hell she's talking about, and she explains that while sleeping over at another friend's house, something had tugged at her shorts while she slept. She'd woken up and heard Evan's voice. Then he visited her in a dream and asked to date, or something like that. She said yes. Of course, we know she made up Evan, so we're kind of like, what's wrong with you? And we don't talk about the demon stuff anymore. Now Savannah was extremely possessive over her friends. When she'd see us with someone else, she'd text us nonstop about why we hadn't invited her. We tried to keep our distance, but she lived on the ground floor and literally watched out her window for us to come outside. She'd latch onto us. We didn't know much about her home life, but she always seemed troubled. She had scars on her wrist and talked about running away from home. Her parents seemed alright, if rather strict and religious. We still hung out with her because we were worried, but we were starting to feel weird about it. Worse, she'd randomly show up holding her hand out, saying Evan was holding her hand. She'd look at random things and laugh when no one was talking because Evan had told her a joke. Once, she made us feel her cheek where it was supposedly warm from Evan kissing her. It was not warm. One day, my sister and I were bored from her talking to Evan on the Ouija board. She was still controlling the whole thing and wanted some fun. I texted my mom to call my phone from a blocked number and play creepy sounds. Looking back, this was one of the dumbest things I did, but at the time it was just for fun. My mom made the call and I put it on speaker. Savannah is living for it, especially when my mom played a track from a scary movie about a ghost. My mom took it a step further and threw a banana off from our third-story balcony for us to see. Savannah said it was a sign that Kieran was winning, but we had no idea of the fire this would light in her. We were about to tell her it was a prank, but again, her mom called her inside. When she found us the next day, and I came clean about the prank, she laughed and said there was no way we could have done that. I said no, my mom literally did all of it. Well, Savannah had told her friend about it, who had told her that yellow objects, like the banana, were a sign of the devil, and seeing them meant the devil was hunting you. This was all she talked about for a while, but since nothing else happened, she gradually forgot. Things went back to normal for a while, until Autumn moved in. Autumn and Savannah connected instantly because of their history with depression. Autumn was a few years younger than us, but had a hell of a lot more of a past. This included significant time spent in psychiatric facilities and violence towards her classmates and family. Autumn claimed she heard demons talk to her at night, and just like that, the ghost stuff had started again. Savannah had felt threatened by Autumn and felt the need to one-up her with ghost stuff. She told her that Evan was her ghost brother that looked out for her. I was like, hold on, you claimed he was your boyfriend. She giggled and said, that's gross, he's my brother. Her story had completely switched. Now she was dating another demon named Jacob, and they were engaged. She even showed us a ring to prove it. The next week or so was literally like a match between them to see who was the darkest and most involved in the spiritual world, or whatever. They'd compare scars on their wrist and brag about hurting themselves, and doing things like sneaking out at night. In a move to one-up Autumn, Savannah drew a giant pentagram in the parking lot with chalk. Her parents found out, and she backed out and blamed it on Autumn. The next freaking day, people come to repave the parking lot. The pentagram is now buried under it forever, literally. Savannah moved on to say that her friend had found Jacob's body and was going to put his spirit back inside it. Savannah continued to take advice from this friend, who fueled everything she did. Savannah now said that her friend was teaching her witchcraft. We mostly avoided her at this point, but she'd ask us to do things like make holy water with her and try to summon her familiar. From that point on, she insisted that she was a fire witch and walked around wearing all black with Halloween-like makeup on her face. She and Autumn frequently snuck out together, and occasionally we'd see cop cars at her house. My sister and I were avoiding them both, but now we'd get fiery texts from both of them if we hung out with other people, especially our guy friends. Once, they saw us get home and stood in the parking lot pretending to be possessed. Autumn also cut off all her hair and claimed to have tried to kill her teacher. My sister and I knew it was bullshit, or at least we hoped, but Savannah took it seriously. She'd go around telling neighbors of terrible crimes she committed or wanted to commit. She even told us that when she'd first seen us outside with hoverboards, that she had wished for them to blow up. One day, we again saw police come to her door, and the officers had jackets that said they were from the Juvenile Justice Department. Her mom pulled me, my sister, and our mom aside to explain what was going on. Apparently 2 years before, they discovered Savannah was talking to a man online. Her messages to him were to come and literally take her parents' lives, after making threats of doing it herself a few days before. We were able to confirm the story after pet sitting for them and finding court papers about it. We'd known she was on probation, but she'd always tell us different stories as to why. Savannah continued to beg us to hang out with her after that, even inviting herself to spend the night. We avoided her at all costs, but she'd follow us everywhere. It kind of died down when Autumn moved out, and Savannah moved with her family shortly after. Since then, she started doing service hours at a horse stable and graduated high school. I really hope she's gotten happier and more stable. Autumn messaged my sister a few months ago, asking to call her mom to confirm she was with us, and we later saw her with a 19-year-old dude. Me, my sister, and mom have moved as well. There were too many incidents in those apartments. Our new place is so quiet and peaceful, but to Savannah and Autumn, let's never meet again. My dog alerted me to something at my window. When I was 17, my bedroom had a window looking out at my backyard. The backyard was fenced in, but on the other side of the fence were some woods and a retention pond. I'd never been scared of this, and kept the blinds open so that when the sun rose in the morning, the natural light would help wake me up. One night, I was up late on my phone with my dog laying in bed next to me. At around 2 a.m., my dog jumped up and started barking at the window. At first, I thought he was just barking at his reflection and told him to stop, but I then realized he was looking at the left side of the window while his reflection was on the right. I couldn't see outside the window because I had left the lamp on my nightstand on. All I could see in the window was the reflection of my bedroom. Not wanting to alert whatever might be out there that I was scared, I faked a yawn, set my phone aside, and turned off the lamp. I then laid down facing the window, and I swear, I saw a set of two human eyes looking back at me from the left side of the window. I drink a lot of water at night, so I had an empty bottle on my nightstand. I grabbed it and pretended to just realize it was empty. I turned on the lamp and acted like I was going to get water. I went to my parents' room, and my dad told me not to worry. We had these motion-activated floodlights, and they hadn't turned on, so there was no way there was anything out there. So I went back to my room and told myself I was just seeing things. I closed the blinds, turned off the lamp, and got some sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went to take my dog out and decided to check out the pine straw bedding underneath my window. It was visibly disturbed, but I did my best to ignore that and remembered what my dad said about the floodlights, and that worked pretty well until my dad tested the floodlights later that day and found that the bulbs had burnt out. To this day, I keep my blinds closed and my lamp off when I sleep. I don't want to risk anything being able to see me, and if anything is somehow peeking through my window, I want to know it's there. If there was someone at my window that night, let's not meet. Hooded man in the woods. Alright, I spent my entire slow day at work yesterday reading through this sub, so I want to share my little story. My childhood best friend Marie and I were around 11 or 12 years old at the time. Marie's family had their own campsite in a provisional park about 2 hours from our hometown and would spend the entire summers each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go out and stay with them for a week, and we were excited to spend our time adventuring around the forest. On the last night I was there, we decided we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out, but beginning to lose light. The path we took was down a short slope right next to the main road, with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side was the forest, with more tall and thick brush. So we were walking along, not seeing a single other person on the path in front or behind us, when we heard a sudden rustling and snapping of branches, similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but then the sound of running footsteps followed. Marie glanced back and suddenly grabs my arm, urging me under her breath to not look back. At the same time, the running stops. I don't know why I didn't ignore her and get a look myself. I guess I could sense the very real fear in her voice and chose to listen. We both start to panic, getting that feeling like when you're running up the stairs after turning the basement light off. We pick up speed as much as we can without breaking into a sprint, knowing the ice cream shop is only about a minute walk at this point. The path soon breaks, and we're in the parking lot. Suddenly, Marie steers me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop, and I go along with it silently, understanding ice cream is no longer an interest right now. Marie is clearly panicking. We both look around, but it seems whatever scared her is nowhere in sight at this point. She walks up to the boat rental, gets us a kayak, and we climb in, beginning to paddle out into the middle of the lake. As we paddle, she tells me that there was a man behind us, and that the man had stopped running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat, with the hood up. Despite it being the middle of July, he had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as he stopped running, she saw him put something shiny away into his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past, given the sounds we heard right before he came running onto the path. We reached the center of the lake and stopped paddling. I pulled out my Nokia brick phone that my parents had given me, just in case, and I handed it to Marie, telling her to call her parents to come pick us up. As the phone rings, I see her look out past me to the shore and go pale, lifting a hand to point to what she's seeing. I turn, and there was the man, stalking his way through the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring out at us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watched him do 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family, and we were freaking out so bad the whole time as the sun got lower and lower. We did manage to have someone come with the truck, but by the time we reached the shore, it was pretty dark outside. I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't been able to call for a ride. Looking back, I don't know why we didn't just go up to the ice cream shop, informed an adult there, and asked her parents to come get us. But it worked out. We got back safe, and thankfully, never saw the man again. A true, very creepy surveillance story. I posted this on No Sleep, and they loved it, and said to post it here, so here you go. First of all, I only just discovered this subreddit today, which reminded me of something that happened to me in 2008. This was a huge thing to my friends and family, and I didn't really talk about it back then, as it scared the fuck out of me. But it was a while ago, and is a really well-known creepy story among myself, my friends, and my family. So I think I may as well share it, as it is admittedly terrifying. I was living with my parents and sister in Brisbane, Australia at the time, and I remember my dad had just gotten Foxtel, but only the TV in the lounge room could use the cable box, and I really wanted to somehow get cable in my room without paying the $99 or whatever for a new box. So my dad one day went out and bought an AV transmitter/receiver. It was basically a two-piece bit of hardware where you would plug in this tiny box into the cable TV in the lounge room, and it would transmit the video signal to the receiver connected to the TV in my room. So one Saturday, I decided to connect it. This is a picture I took of the setup when I was telling my friend the story. My younger sister was the only other person at home at the time, upstairs in her room. I opened up the box and connected it. At first, I was going back and forth, trying to get the cables right, trying to get the channel right, etc. But no luck, until I finally got something. I remember just sitting there, and something started fuzzing in. I remember thinking, oh, here we go, and waiting to see the picture come in clearly. As it started fuzzing in, I remembered that this whole time, the cable setup top box wasn't even on, and that's why it wasn't working this whole time. But then why was I getting signal? It seemed to hit me all at once. As I realized that the box was off, the picture fuzzed in, and I saw a bed. This is the first picture I took. I freaked the fuck out, as at first, I thought it was my bed. I had recently seen Saw 2, and I remembered that scene where she turns on the TV, and it's the camera filming her in her apartment. That was the first thing I thought of. I sprinted upwards to my sister, absolutely terrified. I told her to come down and take a look. She came down and we both realized that it wasn't my bed. We didn't know whose bed it was, or how I was getting the signal. Obviously, it was the AV receiver picking up a camera signal, but we were just confused as to who/what it was for. Eventually, my parents came home, and we concluded that it would have to be a neighbor, or someone living close by for us to be receiving the signal. So we waited until about 6 p.m. And then, someone came into the room. My dad recognized it as one of our neighbors. We still didn't know what the camera was for, but we assumed it had something to do with fidelity. Either his wife or he had set it up to watch the other and see if they were cheating. Either this, or it was to tape themselves having sex. We entertained the idea that he was a murderer and would film himself murdering people in his room, but just to freak each other out. We'd also always make jokes about how one night we'll turn it on and we'll just see his face with clown makeup staring at the camera waving, and then him walking out of the bedroom with a knife. This never happened, but what did happen was still super creepy. We connected to this signal for over a week, but after a few days, the novelty kind of wore off. We felt a bit weird watching it, and just resigned to the explanation that it was to catch his wife cheating, until one day, we turned it on, and realized what we had discovered. Our neighbors were having a bunch of renovations done to their house. During the weekdays, they would be out, and there would be workers at the place pretty much all day. It had been like this for over a month. We started watching the feed and saw a man walk into their room. It was the plumber that had been there regularly for their renovations. We didn't think anything of it until he started opening drawers. I called out to my mom and we started watching it. He started getting into the wife's underpants and sniffing them, doing all that creepy shit. At first we were like, oh my god, how embarrassing. He's being filmed. Will the neighbors see this somehow? But then what happened next was what was truly terrifying. He slowly walked over to the camera and looked right down the lens. We were convinced that he knew we were watching. Mom immediately called Dad. I kept watching. He started fiddling with it and then put it back down. I told Mom that I didn't think he knew we were watching, but he's definitely the guy that put the camera there. My dad came home, and by this time the plumber had left, and much to my mom's pleading, Dad went over to the neighbors to tell them what we saw. My mom wanted to completely stay out of it, and was terrified understandably. When we told the neighbors, they had no idea what we were talking about. They allowed my dad to go up to their room, and what he found was an installed device in the wall that was designed to monitor water usage, which was completely normal at the time, as Brisbane had been hit with a drought recently and there were lots of water restrictions. The plumber had installed this into the wall, but had fitted a camera behind it in the wall to watch the bed. Immediately they called the police, who came over and conducted an investigation. For the next week or so, we didn't hear much about it. I spent most of this time just telling my friends and showing them pictures, but truthfully, my whole family was scared every night. It was just very creepy thinking that we could have stuff like this hidden in our home. Chances are we didn't, but it was still really scary. After a couple of weeks, my mom was speaking to the wife next door, and that's what had happened with it all. The wife said that the police found out that he would at night come to our street and sit in his car, then watch them on his laptop. When mom told me this, I got the biggest shivers. The reason was because on multiple nights, when I had driven home late from my girlfriends or walked home drunk after a night out, I remember seeing a station wagon, always about 30 meters down the street from our house. It was never during the day, always at night. I'd always walk past it and look at my reflection in the windows, assuming no one was inside. I was always so confused by whose car it was, but literally never thought it was anything. It still scares me so much that it was just a creepy plumber watching a hidden camera stream of my neighbors. Anyways, that's my story. It's all true, and still creeps me out to this day, but my friends and I have had a good laugh about it. Babe, there's a man in the house. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 19 and had just moved out of student accommodation into an actual flat with a friend group of 6. The night we moved in, it was just me and one of my girls I'm close friends with. Let's call her Lucy. I had a boyfriend over at the time. Let's call him Alec. The other people who were moving in 2 weeks later, as they were all on various holidays or visiting home. So it was just the 3 of us. Lucy was in her room, and Alec and I were smoking a joint in bed watching kung fu movies. Him and I start to notice a man, around 300 pounds and 6 foot, pacing outside our window and looking in occasionally. We are on the basement floor at this time, but the windows are on ground level. Okay, that's fucking weird. But we'll just make sure the windows are locked. 20 or so minutes pass by, and everything seems okay, until Lucy runs into my room and says, "Babe, there's a man in the house." We left the door unlocked by accident. Fucking chills. I'm like, "What the fuck do you mean there's a man in the house?" Alec is frozen solid. Me and Lucy go into the hall, and the huge man who we saw looking in the windows is in our hall. We ask, "What are you doing here?" And he pulls out his phone and shows us a text message from an unsaved number with our address written on it, and something about people being inside. What the fuck? He tells us he's looking for his girlfriend, and that she lives here. And we're like, "No, the hell she does not. Please remove yourself from our house." He says okay, and that he'll phone his girlfriend. He turns his phone low volume, and he's speaking to another man on the phone, who is clearly not his girlfriend. With more urgency this time, we tell him to get out of the house and he says okay. He leaves, we lock the door, and everyone is shaking. He is still on the phone with this man outside, and they're speaking a language we don't understand, but we can hear him getting angry. I tell Alec to please make the scary man go away, and he goes outside and tells him to shift away from our doorway, as he's really scaring us. He says okay, and his taxi is here. Then, he walks up to a dead-end street where no taxis can go. Again, what the fuck? We tell our upstairs neighbors, who we had met earlier that day, about the whole ordeal. We'll call them Charlotte, Matt, and Rob. They inform us that the same man had tried to come into their house, insisting his girlfriend lived there. Charlotte already had a boyfriend, who we knew of and had also met that day. Rob has more balls than all of us, and threatened him with a knife the time he came over to their house, and he never bothered them again. Over the next couple of weeks, the man would occasionally come back and look into our bedroom windows. Alec was there most times. I'm so glad for that. I have no doubt that he tried the door again, but it was always locked after that. So yeah, huge scary man in the hall. Let's not meet. The intelligent and repetitive Peeping Tom. This story happened about 1.5 years ago now, when I was around 19, and it will always stay with me, as it has definitely given me PTSD and a greater fear of men since it happened. I had just moved into a college apartment with friends, only finding out a few months later that there was improper ventilation, leading to humidity and mold in the bathroom and other spaces. Maintenance/management would proceed to label it as discoloration, and to just leave the windows open/buy a fan, and stop taking steamy showers. This advice was given after this event, and ignoring my reports I made to law enforcement and the main landlord. However, we were barely adults and never had to deal with such a terrible mold issue. Buying sprays and cleaning the ceilings, crevices, tub, etc. Constantly in fear of mold inhalation. We found this, and leaving our windows open with the mosquito screens locked helped the most. This small window, the size of an average human head, about 9 feet off the ground facing the apartment's window, was of no concern to us when we were using the bathroom. After all, we had walked outside and made sure no one could easily look in. Of course, I did not predict what would come next. On our front porch, we had some pumpkins, and a single white chair that was barely used this night. This will be important to later. One night, after airing out the humid bathroom after a shower, I wished my roommate goodnight at around 2 a.m. Before going to use the toilet. I was wearing the baggiest shirt ever, thankfully, so nothing was exposed while doing so, but I nonchalantly flush and go wash my hands while glancing to the left, where the window was ajar as usual. That's when I saw it, in the pitch blackness of night, contrast to the blaring cheap bathroom lights. There was a pale, round orb with a mop of dark hair atop of it. I still cannot explain the feeling I had, almost like somebody is whispering to you, just audibly enough, where you need a second or two to register what they just said. That pause, and a quick turn to the right, and then a quick spin right back for the window. I saw a white arm leaning into the mosquito screen for support, before whisking away and down, out of frame. It moved. And, without another thought, I found myself running for the front door, yelling, "Someone was looking in our bathroom!" a few times to my roommate in the living area. I heard her yelling back while I found myself already at the bottom of the window outside, now hearing scuffling through the wood chips outside our apartment building. It was clearly the sound of someone escaping through the shadows. No mistaking it. I could not see anyone through the shitty trees that were planted, and stopped as I could not pinpoint exactly where he ran. I thought about yelling some cheap insult or threat to scare him, but found myself feeling waves of shock silence me. I ran past my roommate, grabbing my phone from inside and calling my mother, who advised me to call a non-emergency number in my town. I did so, while sitting on the patio with my self-defense items, and my roommate. The lady that answered was annoyed, and sounded like she did not believe me, no matter what I said, because I did not get a good look at him. She simply sighed, and said the police will be over to survey the complex a few times, then hung up. My roommate and I were in shock, just sitting there in silence. We discussed every detail of what just happened, when we saw a cop car driving around an apartment complex a block away, then immediately drive off after 1 minute. Obviously, this left me feeling defeated more than before. I got angry, stood up, and examined the area outside my window myself. I saw no footprints or markings that were unusual, and even tried standing on the electric boxes outside to see if I could look inside. Not only were the boxes too narrow for someone any bigger than myself, as I have a small shoe size compared to the average man, but this would only allow for a view of half of the ceiling for a second or two before falling off. This was not how he looked in. I knew from the way he had struggled to get down. I saw enough of his torso to determine that he was around 5'8", and had to have some other way to easily be staring in like he had. It was also odd that he had darted off without me seeing him, and only hearing him because there are sensors placed around the complex, with one right by our bathroom window. When triggered, they display a bright and blinding light that lights up the whole back area and side of our apartment where this occurred. I brainstormed for a second before darting off past it. It didn't go off. When I walked back to my roommate, that's when it did. I tested this twice over. Same results. It only worked when you were not running past it. I felt a sense of relief, only to the fact that I was not so crazy. I was the only witness to this, but I could tell my roommate believed me. We headed back to our front door, talking about what we would do if he came back. Obviously, we would be keeping our window closed now, but we had to give him just desserts, we thought in our exhausted and overwhelmed teen heads. That's when I joked about grabbing one of our pumpkins and hitting him over the head with it when I stopped in my tracks. "Hey, didn't we have a chair there?" I asked. The white patio chair was gone. We looked around. It was nowhere to be found. I gasped and almost fell to my knees. That's how he did it. My roommate hurriedly looked through her phone. She remembered having a food order earlier that day with a photo confirmation. Approximately 4 hours earlier, there it was, the bag at our door that was sitting directly on the white chair, next to our pumpkins. The same chair. I immediately posted this to social media sites, asking for help finding this distinct chair, thinking it would be the last hope we could have of finding this pale-faced creep. Not only had he been staring into our bathroom for God knows how long, but he had surveyed the front door area and possibly looked in through the windows here as well, although the blinds were closed. Our apartment made sure to install the worst kind of blinds that you can never fully close, so if anyone wants to look in, even into your bedroom, they would just have to crouch down a little bit. We felt disgusted and shocked. I left 3 voice messages with the apartment complex the next day, informing them of the incident and about the issues with their ventilation. As you expected, no one ever got back to me, which was weird since they always did previously. I felt like everyone failed me in this moment. I did everything I could, but I never received any closure or solace. In fact, I received tips from other college girls in the same area, telling me of very similar experiences where they sometimes had a full view of a greasy, older man, even touching himself to them. Recently, these past few months too, there have been numerous SAs, as well as peeping toms in the same area of our apartments. Funnily enough, the clear descriptions match what glimpse I got of him. Still, the police never caught anyone in connection to these cases. I never viewed this area as a bad area, and always took every precaution I could, but I still felt at fault now. I know I am not, but I hope everyone living in a similar situation makes sure to at least close their shower curtains to shield yourself, or closes their window when the bathroom is in use at all. I wish I could buy security cameras, but I know management would file a complaint. I am moving out soon, so this is the only solace I have of getting out of there and leaving this all behind. And to the greasy, stinky, pale dude who I stared eye to eye with a long time ago, I hope we never meet. For your sake. Kidnapped and zip-tied. So, now that the case is over and I can talk about it freely, I figured I would share my story about the time I got kidnapped. This happened in 2021. I was 20 at the time and had just gotten off work at 11 p.m. and went straight home to get ready to go out and meet my friend at the strip club. My kidnapper messaged me via Facebook Messenger to hang out and smoke, but I told him that I was meeting another friend and didn't want to hang out, so he offered to drive me to and from the strip club. Well, at around 12:30 a.m., he came to pick me up and said he had to dump some garbage first. He had a couch on the back of the pickup truck bed, which I assumed was the garbage he was talking about. He said he made us margaritas, but I told him I didn't want to drink until I got to my destination, so we ended up just smoking weed on the way to dump the couch. It was about a 25 to 30 minute car ride to where he wanted to dump this couch, and by the time we made it to the destination, it was about 1:15 a.m. There was a logging road off to the side of the highway that goes for miles. He pulled up all the way down to the end and left the couch there, then got back in the truck and started driving back towards the highway. But once we got halfway back to the highway, he stopped and put his car in park. Then he pulled out a pipe and started smoking more weed. After taking a hit, he turned his head to me and stared at me for a minute with a weird smirk on his face. Then all of a sudden, he almost looked like he wanted to jump at me, but stopped himself in the moment with his hands, in a motion like he was about to grab me. I got scared at this point and was frozen in shock, not knowing if it was a joke or not, but I quickly realized it was not a joke and opened my door like I was about to get out, and he did the same. I closed my door and he closed his too. We ended up playing door tag, and eventually, he got tired of it and got out of the truck and ran to my side. He opened my door and tried pulling me out by my legs. As I was trying to kick him, I pulled my phone out to call the police, and of course my Face ID didn't want to work in that moment. He ended up snatching the phone out of my hands. I kicked him hard enough in the chest and he flew backwards, falling to his butt. I grabbed my purse and hopped out of the truck, then started running towards the highway. I kept looking back to see how far he was, and he gave me a head start before running after me, then grabbing me by the back of the shoulders and forcefully throwing me into a ditch. I landed on my stomach with one leg straight out, and the other was bent at a weird angle. He sat on top of my legs and was holding my left hand behind my back. I screamed and begged him to take me home, that I wouldn't tell anyone, but he got upset that I was screaming and tried to suffocate me with his other hand, while still holding my left hand behind my back. I kept trying to pull his hands off of my face with my right hand because it got to the point where I couldn't breathe. Then finally, he let go of my face, and I turned my head around to see what he was doing. To my surprise, I watched him pull zip ties out of his front jean pocket. He zip-tied my hands behind my back and tried to force himself on me. I remember digging my knees into the ground so he couldn't do anything, and he didn't. He got up and started pacing, saying, "It shouldn't have happened this way. Just do what I say." I cried, telling him if he was going to do anything, to put me back into the truck, and he did. After all that went down, he got back in the truck. Mind you, I'm still tied up, and he drove back to the highway and started driving around. I made up every excuse to get him to take the zip ties off, and he wouldn't. I asked for a cigarette, and he lit one, smoked on it a bit, then held it up to my mouth saying, "I'll hold it for you." At this point I thought to myself, what can I do to get myself out of this situation? I thought I was going to die. I started saying things like, "You can be my sugar daddy. I will pay to take us out to dinner tomorrow. If this is all you wanted from me, you could have just said that." He loved it so much that he started saying he would put me on his life insurance policy so that when he dies, I can get the money. Eventually I asked him again if he would take the zip ties off. They were so tight that it was cutting my circulation. He pulled over to the side of the road and pulled out a mini pocket knife from his car keys, then cut them off of me. It took a few tries because of how tight they were. Then he gave me my phone back. I had an Apple Watch on my wrist and asked him for it after noticing that it wasn't on my wrist anymore. Then he got this surprised look on his face and said, "We need to go back and get it." Then he turned around and headed back to where everything had just happened. I got so scared and thought to myself, "Yep, this is it. I'm going to die tonight, and nobody will know until somebody finds my dead body." Once we got there, he told me to stay in the truck, and he got out and searched the ditch for my watch. He came back to the truck after 5 minutes and said he couldn't find it, but would be back in the morning to look when it's light outside. We got back on the highway and headed back to town. Once we got into town, he asked me, "What do you want to do now?" I said, "Bring me to my mom's house. I have work in 4 hours and I'm tired." It was about 4:30 a.m. by this time, and he brought me to my mom's. After getting to my mom's house, I looked his name up on Google, and he was on parole for first-degree murder. He had served 17 and a half years in prison for murdering someone for their life insurance policy. I'm 22 now, and thankfully I got to see another day. I was subpoenaed to testify against him, and he was found guilty of all charges on November 6th of 2023, but as of now, he hasn't been sentenced yet. I still wonder what could have happened. In 2018, I lived with my partner and my German Shepherd in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. I was 33 years old, and our apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up unit, a very typical low-budget Chicago rental in a changing neighborhood. The layout of our building is going to matter in this story. Our building had a total of 12 units. Mine and the 3 below me had a shared front entrance. The other 8 units were through a second entrance. All 12 apartments had connected back porches and stairs that shared a walkway to a rear gate, which led to an alley. From the front stairwell, there are windows on each landing to the back porches. You can see the back door of my apartment when standing at the front door through that window. We had good relations with our neighbors, especially those that lived directly below us and shared our front door. This was the thing that saved all 3 of us: my partner, my dog, and me. My partner was in a touring band at the time and would leave for weekends or weeks at a time. And it was a scary thing for me because I was essayed and stalked by an ex in my teens and 20s. I always worried something would tip him off and he'd start stalking me again. A little less than a month before a 2-week tour my partner had scheduled, I received a creepy Facebook message from that stalker ex from yet another new account. About a week after that, my car was broken into. The glove box was emptied. Things were thrown around, but the only thing that was taken was a bag of dog treats. I had about $20 in change in the compartment between the seats, and they left the money. I was on high alert at that point, and very scared about the time I'd be alone during the tour. My partner was kind of irritated with me and the situation, and felt that it was too last minute to cancel, especially over what amounted to a bad feeling, and a few isolated things that weren't direct threats. And truthfully, car break-ins are very, very common in Chicago. It happened to me like 15 times, and police usually do reports over the phone and don't even come to the scene. What I found really strange was that the thief didn't take the money. There was a homeless man who had started camping on the boulevard nearby recently. My partner left for his tour, and I set up cameras and bought door braces for my front and back doors. I became completely nocturnal, unable to sleep at night. My poor dog developed diarrhea, maybe because she was picking up on my stress levels. It meant that I was taking her down all flights of 4 stairs for her to go blast her bowels out 6 or 7 times at night. I had the distinctly prickly crawling sensation of being watched when I would take her out, but I couldn't tell what was genuine and what was my own fear and paranoia. Her diarrhea lasted an unusually long time, like 3 or 4 days. I was going in and out of the main door a lot, feeling very scared, and I noticed that some of my neighbors wouldn't pull the door all the way closed, so the lock engaged. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor one day, including that I was extra careful because of the stalker. He was supportive, said he'd mention it to the other neighbors if he saw them, and I noticed that the door was locked more frequently after that. My partner came home at about 11 a.m. on Sunday morning. At about 8:30 a.m. that morning, my first floor neighbor's place was burglarized. He was a metalhead dude who collected instruments, sold weed and psychedelics, and also lived alone. I guess he went out for breakfast and left his door unlocked while he was gone. Someone had come in, eaten the leftovers in the fridge, took his coat and pair of boots. They also took his college diploma, but left $500 in the same cabinet. They left all the expensive musical instruments and mixing equipment, left the drugs, but did take a set of keys. The keys were to the first floor apartment, and a master key for the front door and the back gate. My neighbors ran into each other right after the break-in, and the second floor neighbor said to go tell me because I have a stalker. So the metalhead neighbor came up to let me know what had happened. My partner had just gotten home from his tour when he knocked at the front door. I jumped out of my skin, but looked through the peephole, recognized him, and the 3 of us stood on the stairs at my front door while he told us about the break-in. We jabberjawed for a while, about 15 to 20 minutes. While we were talking, we heard the front door open and close below us, but thought nothing of it. Then we saw a man climbing up my back porch steps to my back door through the window. There was no other apartment he could have been going to, and he had to walk past all 11 more accessible units on his way to mine. He was not my stalker. I did not recognize him, but his images burned into my mind. He was wearing flashy black and white high-top sneakers, and his black coat was oversized and hanging off his shoulders. We locked eyes through the windows, and he froze up halfway up the stairs to my back porch. He slowly took a cell phone and called someone as he slowly turned around halfway up the steps. He walked back down the stairs in an artificially slow motion, like he was pretending to be nonchalant, and then bolted into a sprint as soon as he hit the porch below mine. My neighbor ran downstairs and dialed 911. My partner and I ran through the apartment to the back porch and saw a sedan and a windowless van pull out from a sketchy building 2 doors down. Both cars floored it out the alley. We didn't get the plates, but the cops said it wouldn't have mattered. There wasn't any crime committed, and nothing concrete can justify stopping them. They very condescendingly explained this to me as they took my statement later. My neighbor is the only one who actually made the call and has a police report. My partner and I were just considered witnesses. For a long time, the thing that scared me the most was the tool that my neighbor found when he went running downstairs. It was a 2x4 piece of wood, cut to about 2 feet, but about 6 inches of it had been made into a handle. It looked like a paddle, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what it was, but I'm pretty sure that it was a ram for the door jam locks. When I looked at my door afterward, it looked like the frame had been repaired, like it had been broken open before. It seems like they used one master key to place their ram, get somebody at the back door to catch me if I tried to run out that way, and somebody else was going to come back around, and they'd break in my front door and go forward with whatever they had planned. We caught them before they could catch me unaware. They seemed to have aborted the plan. I suspect they'd been watching me, especially while I was taking out my dog, and figured that I was alone. It was pure coincidence that my partner had gotten home 30 minutes before all this. I feel that we all could have been horribly injured, or worse, had we been trapped inside and they'd gotten the jump on us. Nothing else ever came of it, except that my landlord refused to change the locks, but he did agree to let us out of our lease. I moved out of Chicago, and now have added a younger dog that I'm training to do some bite work. My house is surrounded by cameras and floodlights and wingnut neighbors, so whoever was on our back porch, and whatever they had planned, let's not meet. I was in a very bizarre robbery. Throwaway account, because I don't know why. Just didn't want this on my main one. Not much else a reason. So I'm a 29-year-old male. This happened when I was 20, and it has led to some charming anxiety issues, which were actually only addressed about 6 months ago. I have been told the best way to cope with things is to confront the issues head on, and in a way, that's what I'm trying to accomplish. So before I got my life together, I used to work odd jobs around my hometown's neighboring towns. It was my way of avoiding college and going into the oil field. I made my money fixing fences, cleaning out horse stalls, and unloading feed and hay. Not actually bad work, to be honest, but I'll admit that I used it as an excuse for not doing more with myself. When I knocked off of work, there was this one little country-styled gas station that I used to go to because they never ID'd, and it was easy to get a bottle of liquor or a six-pack, and they sold some of the best fried chicken that even to this day I've ever had. Well, on this particular day, there was nobody at the register. It was a little after 5 in the afternoon, and there were literally only 3 employees at this store, as it was a family-owned and operated place. I had plans with a girl that I was seeing, and I promised her a six-pack and a night of relaxation at her place while her parents weren't home. I was in a hurry because of this, so I went to inquire about why nobody was working. I went into the back of the store, where I found the owner, along with 4 other guys playing poker on a fold-out table. I said I needed to make a purchase, and he said he would be there in a minute. The owner, while a very good man, definitely had his share of addictions. At this time he was high on something, which could have been a number of things. He told me to sit down and play a few hands. The owner was wearing a vest that had all of his money clipped into it. I told him I wasn't trying to lose any money. Then he offered to float me the buy-in. I said I'd rather not, but the 20-year-old me was always much easier to persuade. I'm not a good card player, but something my family had always told me was that I have more luck than I do sense. And within an hour of playing, I had made enough money to give the owner his entry fee back, and still had a lot of money left over. I'll put it this way, this wasn't an extremely high-stakes game of cards, but after paying the owner his fee, I was holding close to $4,000. I'm not a gambler, and you'll learn why, so I'm not sure even to this day how the dynamics work. While we were playing, talking shit, drinking beer and smoking cigarettes, just a good time. Then, the time became not so good. The beep from the front door rang into the back room. I'm one for punctuality, at least when it comes to doing your job, so I was a little annoyed when the owner didn't tend to whoever was coming into the store, much like he didn't tend to me when I initially walked in. That's a random irk of mine. This part still gives me chills to think about. I could hear the clacking of steel-toed boots hitting the floor, which made its way towards the back room that we were in. It didn't seem like much, meaning that it wasn't completely out of the ordinary. Then, the door of the room flew open, and 4 guys entered the room. All were wearing either red or blue bandanas over their faces. As far as their attire, they didn't look much different from anybody else. 2 wore cowboy hats, and the other 2 wore trucker-styled caps. All 4 were holding shoulderable weapons. We were all ordered to our feet. Everybody complied. It took me longer than expected to register what was actually happening. The table was flipped over, and 5 of us, minus the owner, were forced against the wall at gunpoint. There was a guy on the door who apparently missed orientation because 2 of the guys in our party had slipped past him, and he had to chase them down through the main store. The 4 of us that remained were held against the wall by a guy holding what I'm assuming now to be an M16 assault rifle. The owner was taken, beaten, and one of the guys that I'm assuming or have always assumed to be the ringleader took a book knife and cut his clothing off. I honestly thought this was going somewhere else, but I guess thankfully it didn't. One of the guys started duct taping his ankles and his wrists. At the time, I'm thinking, okay, they're just going to restrain us, take the money, and then leave. Not ideal, but that's manageable enough. Then, they put what looked like a pillowcase or a sack and put it over his head, then sloppily started wrapping duct tape around it. 20-year-old me wasn't having it. A bunch of punks with guns weren't going to walk in and start messing with me or my company. Boy, was I stupid. I threw a nearly empty Heineken bottle at the owner's primary assailant, then progressed towards him. The bottle went nowhere near where I was aiming, and I literally lifted 1 foot off the floor and didn't even put it down before I was struck and fell back into the wall. The guy that hit me screamed in my face. Don't even remember what he said. It still gives me a panic attack when I try to revisit it. The remainder of us were duct taped by our wrists and ankles as well. At one point, I had the barrel of a rifle in my face, and the guy next to me, God bless his soul, chastised the guy by saying, "You want to point that at somebody? Then point it at me, not him." The next part screws with me in a variety of ways that I don't even know how to explain. One of the masked men pointed the rifle at him, then pulled the trigger. All that could be heard was a metallic click. I don't know about all of them, but the one who had pulled the trigger definitely didn't have a loaded gun, which leads me to believe that the guns were just props. They took the money, then shut the lights off, and left the store. The back room has no windows, so it was dark, like really dark. I kept the multi-tool in my pocket for work, but it wasn't one of the heavier grade ones. It was a 2x2-inch one that could fit in my wallet, but I always kept it loose in my pocket during the day. It took some flexibility on my part to contort my restrained body enough to be able to get it out of my pocket, but I was eventually able to free myself. For whatever reason, I thought the owner was going to suffocate, so I went to him and cut him free first. He was fine, just in pain. Everyone made it out with nursing and trauma at most. No fatalities. The two that got away were found restrained the same day in the walk-in freezer. Police were called. No investigation was conducted. I couldn't even drive myself home. I had to call my sister to come pick me up. I don't know about what was actually in store for us, and what would have happened if we didn't comply. This is the source of many anxiety attacks, and the reason I'm partially afraid of the dark. I'm not sure if this classifies for the sub, but definitely worth getting off my chest. Someone keeps knocking at my door late at night. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city and found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I'd get to live alone, and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted to pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself was great. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides, with my front door being at the start of the corridor. My bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you can literally hear people in the apartment complex, walking, talking, etc. from my bedroom, and any room for that matter. Last week, I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, around 10:15 or 10:30ish, and I had a day off, so I took a shower and hopped into bed to watch Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knock coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so and just thought that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when once again, I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed, went to the door, and looked through the peephole, and sure enough, it was pitch black. I once again shrugged it off and went back to my room, but before I could even sit down properly, I heard it slightly louder. At this point, I thought it was my friends playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked if he was knocking on my door, and if he was, it wasn't amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm at home. I have to be up at like 7:30. I believed him and hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing. I then unlocked the door and took a peek, then closed the door and locked it. Me being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait and catch whoever was knocking, so I spent a solid 10 minutes silently looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and ran out to the apartment hall. I heard someone booking it down the steps and heard him lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall, so I ran a few steps down before realizing whoever this is was waiting behind a corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and called the cops. They were there within a few minutes, scanned the building and the street, but couldn't find anyone. They told me that it could just be some kids pulling a prank and to never run after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night and the knocking stopped. It could have been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the fucking creeps was the fact that whoever it was ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner. He didn't keep running. If it were some pranksters, I find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few days because I just expected to be jumped by someone when walking into my apartment, but so far, nothing has come of it. But I've let it go at this point and just hope that it won't happen again. narrowly avoided being murdered. This is a story of someone I knew and had cut ties with because he was a fucking psycho. The first half will be to add context as to why I cut him off, and the second half is what makes it a Let's Not Meet. I don't know if he uses Reddit, so I'll omit ages and locations. It started about 4 years ago when I was living in a friend's house while attending a nearby university. It was myself, my friend, his sister, and their parents. Roughly about 2 weeks into staying there, my friend's sister invited her boyfriend to live in the house too, and by all accounts, he was a pretty cool guy at first, very sociable and full of great stories. We often sat around the table for drinks and talked about life, having a smoke in the garden. Within the first month, however, cracks started to show in this veneer. He would rant about government conspiracy, how he was always a wronged party, he was big into Sigma male bullshit, and martial arts, and Christ did he have a temper. He had this big dog he always kept in a cage that was extremely violent when he wasn't around. The dog attacked his girlfriend and had to be put down. That's when the guilt trips towards her began, and the ranting became incessant. About 2 months later, he had the bright idea to live in a shipping container, mainly because the parents wanted him out, and dragged his girlfriend along for the ride. I'm not talking about one of those cheap little restoration jobs. This was a rented container, in a storage yard, among the outskirts of the town we were living in. He would intimidate and threaten the staff there constantly, until they called the police. This, of course, was another conspiracy. He became increasingly abusive to his girlfriend, to the point where the family got involved to get her out of there. I stuck close to them, having pretended to be on his side until we could safely get her out. They broke up, which he blamed me for, claiming I was poisoning her against him to make her mine. She has a new partner now and they're happy. We all blocked the Psycho X on everything possible, but he continued to harass them until he eventually disappeared. Or so we thought. Fast forward to last year, I started to receive messages over social media from different accounts, blocking each one in turn when I discovered who it was. Some friendly and some hostile. One of these profiles, however, was pretending to be someone I knew from university. We talked about life and how things were going. Eventually, I was invited to a house party, claiming it was a free house and plenty of people were coming. I booked the time off work, made my travel plans, and kept talking to this friend, coming up to the date of the party. I mentioned it to my friend's sister, and she was interested in going herself, until I mentioned the address. Then she panicked. The address in question was a property belonging to the crazy ex's father that was scheduled for sale. I waited until the day of the party and called the police to check the property, claiming a suspected break-in. They found 5 people in there, including the ex. Parked out front was a butcher's van, equipped with food for storage, and a collection of knives, hammers, and rope. I'm glad I didn't go. Someone tried to break into my house and find me. This story happened 3 years ago, around the time that COVID started, so it was a while back, but still worthy of a post. It was early 2020, and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but she and her husband didn't really take to it, and their commute to work was long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, and my sister pretty much rented it for free to me. I had just paid the water and electricity and looked after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 or 3 months and had already gotten used to it, but one night after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards my door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down and picked it up, thinking that it might have been mine since I'm a smoker. But after looking at the brand name, I realized that it wasn't mine, and threw it away. I didn't think much of it, and just shrugged it off as some asshole throwing it at my curb. So I went on with my night, and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted a few more cigarette butts. This time, near my porch. Needless to say, I was pissed off, and thought that someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I don't know who it was, there was nothing I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so whoever it was probably walked off as I was approaching. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, past 1 a.m., so I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood, and it was COVID, so people rarely ventured out at night, but I didn't think much of it. Around half an hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about, as their voices seemed almost muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa and walked to the front door to make sure that it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my door and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob being shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to the window to see if they had walked away or changed their minds. My windows have bars from the inside out that you have to unlock so that you can move the curtains or look out of the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted it up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against my window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically stuttered over his own steps as he jumped back. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started to kick the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 or 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while, I was staring at them frozen in fear, trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars over the window, locking them and running up the stairs to the storage room where I pushed the table up to the door and called the cops. As I listened, I expected the two to come inside any minute, as I heard a loud crash from the bars of the window being shaken aggressively. When they realized that they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long, angry scream that probably woke up half the neighborhood. By the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. I honestly don't know what they wanted, or why they were so determined to get in, but whoever it was, let's not meet again. They came to my apartment after harassing me for months. The timeline of all of this begins in spring 2019 and concludes in November 2019. It only occurred to me recently that this story would be appropriate for this sub. It's easily the wackiest and creepiest interpersonal situation I've ever experienced, and it took an absurdly long time to unravel. From the beginning, I felt like a detective trying to suss out the identity of my harasser. In the end, when all of the pieces rapidly fell together, my head was spinning, and I was overwhelmed with confusion, betrayal, and an ominous sense that I may have been spared from something much worse. Let's begin. I had a friends with benefits relationship with a guy named Judah, beginning in 2018. He came along one of those doomed, let's open our relationship as a last-ditch efforts to not break up relationships, and I enjoyed his presence, but didn't necessarily feel a deep connection. My relationship with Judah tapered off, amicably, with our interactions becoming limited to liking each other's Tumblr posts and occasional Snapchats. After a while of no interaction, Judah contacted me for some writing advice. I wanted to be genuinely useful, so I wrote a few paragraphs of heartfelt constructive feedback. He thanked me for my input, and after that point, our interactions ceased. Not long after I had written this out, I had begun receiving some vicious anonymous messages on Tumblr. The first few were insulting my appearance and my art-making ability. I shrugged it off. Random trolls are common as gnats at this point. I didn't think anything of it. The messages continued rolling in, and they began to become more and more disturbingly specific. The harasser began to imply that he knew where I lived, and dropped that they knew what school I went to, which wasn't information readily available on my blog. At this point, I knew that I had to be receiving them from someone that I knew in real life, or from a creep who was dedicated enough to figure out my full name from the clues on my blog. Difficult, but not impossible. It was at this point that I began to suspect Judah. Extremely few people from my real life knew my Tumblr URL, and he was the only person I could guess with any motive of jealous harassment, since we weren't talking anymore. I didn't think he was the type of person to act like that, but crazy people can be very talented in hiding their crazy. I blocked him on all social media, and assumed that I'd be moving on with my life. Wrong. The messages became more frequent and creepier. They began making fun of my disabilities and threatening physical attacks. A common theme among the messages was about how being disabled makes me useless and undesirable. Strangely, Christianity kept being brought into it, as they claimed that my illness was the result of God's punishment. I had started to dread whenever a new message icon appeared, so I turned off anonymous messaging. But this measure did not prevent me from further harassment, because this began a series of dedicated harassment accounts, with the first few messages coming from brand new accounts called Asshole Chaos Bringer. The tone of the interactions began to turn noticeably more occult. The messages started talking about how Lord Satan is displeased with me. I blocked this account. From this, I became more confident that it was a single person sending me all these messages, despite the fact that they had tried to sound as if they were coming from different sources. Hateful messages were, and still are, exceedingly rare for me, and there was clearly a person very dedicated in trying to freak me out. I suspected Judah even more, but didn't have enough evidence, and didn't choose to confront him. After blocking Asshole Chaos Bringer, I began receiving messages from another shiny new account, Asshole Chaos Bringer 2. The messages from this account truly take the cake of batshittery. I'm attaching screenshots because although this is quite a work of creative writing, I wasn't the one who made it up. I really don't want to have to bring this curse down, but you know, the demons got me, and I have to do their bidding, or else I'm the one getting hurt. I hope you understand. I'm so sorry for all of this. I'm so sorry. The abyss demands balance and justice for what you've done. I'm so very sorry. I almost feel bad that the demons I work for have been telling me to torment you so much. You already are the way you are. Isn't that torment enough? I almost feel some mercy, but this energetic warfare isn't over yet. Tonight, on this full moon, things will get crazy, and maybe I'll try to get the demons to leave you alone, although all they want is to eat your soul. You poor, tormented little thing, hiding in false confidence and false power. We pity you, truly. I pray you have protection methods. I wasn't moved by their prose, and blocked this account as well. There was one more account created to harass me, after which I assumed this person ran out of email addresses. A little while later, after a period of silence from this person, I decided to turn on anonymous messages again. To my dismay, shortly after I changed the setting back, hate messages started trickling back in, using the same language I've come to expect from my usual harasser. At one point I received a heartfelt apology, apparently from the same person who had been writing the other hateful messages. However, one day later, after I'd posted their apology, they instantly backtracked and started up the harassment again. However, at the same time, I began getting anonymous messages from someone who said they noticed from my photos that we lived near each other. They said they were interested in becoming friends, but were too shy to reveal themselves. I gently prodded this person to message me from their actual account, and they eventually did. This person introduced themselves as Elm. They were a non-binary person who was new to the area and did not know many people outside of their work. We chatted for a bit and found some common ground. They were way more spiritual than I was, but I'm not disinterested in that kind of thing, so we talked about our individual theologies. Their spirituality set off a little red flag. I suspected that perhaps they could have been the one who sent the curse message, so I asked the question as a test. Do you know much about astrology? Previous messages had made extensive use of my birth charts when insulting me. They responded, barely. So I breathed a little sigh of relief and marked them off as safe in my head. Since this harassment was still an issue to me at the time, I decided to tell them about it. In response, they said, Jesus, that's honestly kind of scary. I'm sorry you've got some bitter person coming out your throat. Anyways, after a few days, I had begun to consider this person a friend. We weren't the most compatible, but they were having a rough time, and I had the time and resources to help them out. After a bit, we decided to meet up. My usual weed man had run dry, and they had somebody that I could buy from. So I agreed to pick them up at their place, and we would go get the pot and then chill at mine. They met me at their apartment's leasing office, which they claimed was because they needed to pay rent. We picked up the weed and went back to my apartment. We ended up driving way longer than expected, due to being given a wildly incorrect address. Therefore, I was unexpectedly tired by the time we arrived at my apartment. On the way to my apartment, they tripped and fell, twisting their ankle. I offered them an ankle compress to mitigate the injury, and they took it. We smoked and chatted for a while. The interaction was normal, maybe a little awkward. Elm had a manic energy, which would seem to randomly flap, after which they'd snap back to their frenetic disposition. My exhaustion from the extra long drive cut our hangout short, because I had to drive them home before I became too exhausted to operate a car safely. They seemed kind of disappointed. I assumed this was just because we had only hung out for a short time. I dropped them off back at home, and had a generally positive regard for Elm afterwards. I never saw that ankle compress again. The anonymous messages began to dry up, although I still got them, and they were still nasty. I messaged Elm occasionally. I was intending to take them to a nearby formal garden. Then, suddenly, I got a message from Elm. They said they just didn't have enough in common, and that they weren't interested in being friends with me anymore. I was taken aback by this, and a little hurt. I had never experienced a friend breaking up with me like that, yet I still didn't feel suspicious of them. By absolute coincidence, on the same day, my best friend Monica logged into her Tumblr account for the first time in over a year. She had received hateful messages, dated to spring 2019, that were clearly from the same person that had been harassing me. This felt like the nail in the coffin as far as damning evidence against Judah. There was precisely one mutual friend that knew the Tumblrs of both Monica and me, and it was him. With that, I felt confident to proceed with confronting him. Immediately, he claimed he knew nothing about the messages, and I wasn't surprised that he'd deny it, so I pressed on. However, he mentioned something that caught my attention. He knew that his partner had sent hateful messages to me after I had written that writing advice. Apparently, they had gotten jealous after learning about our past relationship. I checked his latest Instagram post, and my heart sank. I said, "Wait, is your partner Elm?" He said, "Yeah, they are, but they insist they have nothing to do with what you're getting now." I said, "There's something fucked up here, really fucked up. I find it very, very strange that they met me without ever letting on that they were involved with you. And just today they said they can't be friends anymore." At this point, I assume it was Judah's heart that sank. He asked me some more clarifying questions, and I told him the timeline of our meeting and let him know that I had given them my ankle brace. He said they never told him anything about that we were hanging out, and that they had just gotten the brace from work. Just then, it felt like all of the information I'd gathered in the last year was swirling around me like a whirlwind. This whole time, the blame that I had assigned to Judah belonged to Elm. This person violently hated me without ever having met me, and used deceit to earn my trust enough for me to let them into my home. Elm had been actively harassing me for 5 months by the time they reached out and revealed themselves, and the lies continued for 3 more months after that. They had even lied about not being knowledgeable about astrology, so as to not implicate themselves and avoid being caught. Days passed, and the hateful messages stopped suddenly, and completely, exposing Elm's guilt beyond a doubt. Judah reached out to me to let me know that him and Elm had separated, and that was the last time I had heard from either of them. I sometimes wonder what could have happened if I hadn't cut our hangout short that day. Maybe I wouldn't really have anything to worry about. Perhaps they were all bark and no bite, but they were clearly hiding some very deep troubles under that excitable facade. So Elm, let's not meet again, and for the love of God, stay out of my anons. Crazy conspiracy theorist classmate low-key admitted to have contributed to her husband's passing. Hi everyone, this is my first post on Reddit ever. Hope this is the right subreddit to submit my story to. I have to premise that English is not my first language, so apologies for any mistakes in the text going forward. With that said, strap in. It's going to be a long post. So where to even begin? In my country, the government decided to push free personal classes to anyone who's either benefiting from welfare or just unemployment. I, a 30-year-old female, decided to enroll in one of those classes before moving to another state next year, just to have something more on my CV and to have an excuse to touch grass since I'm unemployed. And I specifically picked social media marketing and management formation that started 3 months ago. Everything was great about it, and it seemed to me all my classmates and professors were great people. I even started to make some friends. I must point out that no one in my class is underage, with the youngest being 21 and the oldest 56. After a couple of weeks of classes, they introduced us to the main curriculum of the whole course that will involve a months-long projects among students. The project consists of inventing a brand from the ground up and market it on social media as if it were real, about to launch on the market. I was super excited about this and couldn't wait to face this challenge. They picked the groups at random, and the RNG gods chose me to be paired with a 56-year-old woman, we'll call her M, that barely spoke to anyone up until this point. Thinking she was nothing but a nice lady, I tried to accommodate her for any preferences she'd have on the project, such as choosing what the topic would be about. She immediately starts telling me half of her life story, just out of nowhere, and focused particularly about a skin issue she had that she claimed doctors only made worse, and how she cured herself with herbs and essential oils. In hindsight, this was already the first red flag. Her rambling just left me scratching my head, and just to break the awkward silence, I said, we could pick that as a brand idea, a natural remedies, food supplements, and cosmetic brand that's not some MLM, and she immediately agreed and smiled like a little girl, which back then made me kinda happy. After then, she picked a name, idea for logo, and motto without asking me for an opinion, saying it felt important to her, and that since I had no experience with this niche, I should learn from her. She insisted so much I had to comply, and that's when hell started for me. She would call and message me on WhatsApp constantly, insisting to see me work in real time on the designs, logos, mock-ups, etc., because she needed to supervise my actions. Her excuse being, I'm a little girl that hasn't known the world yet. She never liked any of my works, and forced me to redo things over and over again. I'm on the spectrum, and have a very hard time setting boundaries with people, or dealing with the idea of displeasing someone, so I kept pushing myself to stay strong, and keep going because I couldn't deal with how this woman would have reacted to anything she might have seen as insubordination, on top of the fact I didn't want to fail the course, and from the beginning all of our professors insisted that the group project was vital to the final score. It is in one of those calls that she starts telling me some of the most unhinged shit I've ever heard in my life. After seeing me drink a sip of an energy drink, she screamed at me to toss that garbage away, and then explains to me the reason why. In her opinion, energy drinks, sodas, and junk foods are infested with nanomachines that infect the human body and rewrites their DNA. She then explains that that's because the great powers are not aliens like most think, but androids and AI hive minds, ready to enslave humanity through biomechanical control. She also keeps going on about how AI exists since before Christ, came from an ancient civilization before the Great Reset, and that all great men in history were actually androids or giants. She also threw in the fact that she's sure dinosaurs are nothing but a fairy tale and could have never existed. The first incident, the biggest one, happened last month on one weekend evening where instead of slaving away from her, I went out with my mom to visit some friends and be back the next morning. I forgot my cell phone and realized too late, but since Em and I hadn't agreed to work that night, I thought nothing of it. Oh man, was I naive. My phone was blowing up with messages and phone calls, all from Em, except a couple of messages from another classmate of mine that told me she had called him obsessively, with demands of him showing up at my front door to make sure I was okay. Later that week, I get called into the school administration because Em apparently had called them too and told them that I had gone missing for 3 to 4 days. I tried in vain to keep it together and just burst into tears in front of the secretaries, telling them and showing them all this woman was putting me through, explaining my boundary setting issues, and they decided to immediately inform the professors and find a solution that would have allowed me to not have any more contact with her. But before they could take any action, me and Em were informed that one more student was going to join our group. We'll call him T. Nothing much to say about him. He's super nice, and did help out that following week by not complying to Em's demands and unreasonable standards. I insisted I take time off to do my own things too. For some reason, she never bitched about decisions made by T. In my last call with Em and T, Em goes on another unhinged rant. This one will be relevant later, and is what makes this story fucked up on multiple levels. She claims she's being gang-stalked and sabotaged by Big Pharma because she had invented a miracle ointment that could reconstruct any sort of biological tissue. She said she tested it on the hand of a friend of hers that had third-degree burns, claiming she saw the nerves, tendons, muscles, and skin grow back, saving the hand. She then added that a prototype of said ointment that mostly consisted of garlic and aloe cured her husband from cancer a few years back. She also added like how after an incident over a decade ago, a doctor decided to sabotage her uterus during an emergency surgery to prevent her from having children. More of the big pharma sabotages involved several lawsuits she was involved in. She concludes that she's taking social media marketing classes with us because she wants to learn how to communicate with social media and the new generations. I'm personally afraid she's going to try to scam desperate people into buying her BS garlic and aloe miracle cure. The second incident happened the next day before class. A friend decided to sit next to me. Since that day, class wasn't going to involve the group projects. We put our stuff on the desk, and since we were early, decided to go into the next room to get a coffee. M comes in, and we hear a commotion in the classroom. When we peek inside, we see her tossing my friend's stuff to another desk. My friend asked what the hell she was doing, and M just coldly responded, "The seat next to OP is mine." I nodded at my friend as if to say, "It's okay," to try to defuse the situation before it escalated. 2 days later, we get informed that I was swapped from M's group to another one. I will say that finally I'm working with the girl I made friends with, and we're having a lot of good fun. So, I thought it was over. No more of M's weird shit, right? The calls and messages from her never ended. Actually, she started obsessively calling the school and the professors, as well as to protest about the decision of removing me from her group. Her texts were filled with weird trivial questions about random topics, or very personal questions, up to 50 to 60 texts per day. At this point, I stopped responding almost entirely to her, and screenshot everything she was sending me. This leads us to the third and last incident, at least so far, that happened last week. I can't go too much into detail because it involves geopolitical beliefs, and I don't want a war in the comments. The short, clean version of events is, M in class asked the professor a question that involved a very important global matter. He replied, and then asked us about our opinion. 2 people spoke before I did, giving examples of people or brands getting cancelled for sharing political stances unwisely, and how a problematic or controversial history or presence on social media might impact negatively one's chances of employment. It was only once I was back home, I realized that M had sent me several rage-filled texts, claiming I was incredibly rude to have answered to her instead of letting the professor answer, and that she was expecting my apologies. I wrote a long text explaining myself, told her I would not apologize since I had done nothing wrong, and finally blocked her number. She thankfully hasn't been able to find me on social media yet, because I don't use my real name online. Since then, she's been missing all classes, which is nice because I really didn't want her to try and confront me in person. But it's what I've learned today from one of my classmates during break that left me horrified and pushed me to write this post. One of my classmates, we'll call her Y, told me that M and her had been exchanging texts from time to time, mostly because Y took pity on M, thinking like I did at first. She was just some weird old and lonely lady. In one batch of texts, she goes into detail about her husband that had passed away from cancer a few years back. Some of the texts read, "We fought tooth and nail. We didn't bend over to men nor God, but they took him away from me anyway. I was so close to keeping him with me. At least I know he trusted and followed me until the end." These are verbatim, because after putting 2 and 2 together, me and Y figured she's either delusional and lying about everything, or she tried to cure her husband from cancer with her ointment instead of traditional medicine, effectively killing him. Also, we found out she's already selling her services inside of an SPA belonging to a relative of hers, using the name she picked for our project. She's also been using my work for her personal social media pages involving her services, which explains why she was so obsessive about supervising my work. She was basically getting free commissions out of me. Today was my last day of class, before the Xmas holidays, and after that, it's just going to be 3 more months until classes are over. I don't know where this story will lead me to further, but honestly, I hope she never shows up to that class again. I'm really hoping to not have to come back with more updates. Chased by a naked man in the forest. Hey y'all, this took place the summer of 2022, and I just never thought of writing down this story because I was so stunned that it happened to me. So every summer in my city, me and my friends like to make small campfires in chill and secluded areas because we don't want to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay a campsite fee to do so. These also happen pretty spontaneously, so it's a nice last-minute thing to do. There's this one spot near my house that's located by a river. That's really nice because no one usually goes there. The only things to be worried about are bears, because living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that, and my house specifically is located right next to the mountains. and forest. So one particular night, at 11 p.m., I decided to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot and set up things early because I want us to be chilling once they get there. The spot I go to has a 2-minute paved walkway I have to go through, and then I have to take a small trail, ramping down the right side of a bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway are 2 lamps located at halfway and another at the start of the bridge / the ramp down to the campfire spot. I park my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and bring my campfire stuff like a flashlight, lighter, small firewood, a small shovel to dig out the pit, etc. I get to the spot, and it's a small sandy beach kind of embankment on the side of the river, with a small waiting area for toddlers and families during the hot summers. So I set up a chair and get to digging the pit with my only flashlight illuminating where I'm digging. I'm also just shoveling the sand right next to me, nowhere near the water. But all of a sudden I hear a loud splash, a splash so loud that it could only have come from something equally large like a 2-hand-sized rock. I'm confused, because I swear I'm not throwing my sand into the water, even though I'm only a few feet away. I shine my flashlight at the water and don't see anything, so I kinda just brush it off. I'm thinking I'm just hearing things. But as I keep shoveling a bit more, I hear another loud splash. At this point I think something is falling from above, because logically something must be falling into the water. I point my flashlight where the trees are above the river, and I don't see anything big enough to make the splash. So as I keep digging, with my heart rate kinda going up at this point, I hear a rustling past the arch of where the bridge goes over the river. I quickly grab my light and shine it towards where I heard the rustling. I call out, "Hello?" No response. In my head, if it was a bear, I should be getting out of there immediately, but there was no bear, or signs of anything for that matter. So I tell myself I'm just hearing things now, because I've seen horror movies before, and now my mind is playing tricks on me. But I hear the noise again, and it clearly sounds like leaves being rustled. So I shine my flashlight over to the area again, and as I focus my eyes towards the illuminated area, I see the naked back of a man hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress, because honestly, of all things I was to see, I didn't think I'd see the naked back of a man. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be in his mid-40s, shaved and not bald, and a medium-ish build, like a mix between chubby and built. As I had my flashlight staying on his back, he started to stand up, and the first thing I noticed was that he wasn't wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up all of my crap and getting the hell out of there, because now I'm piecing in my head that he must have been throwing things into the water to scare me or shoo me away. So after using my reflexive deductive skills, I proceeded to speed walk out of there with all my stuff. I'm carrying all my things with me and briskly walk up the small ramp, and I'm on the paved path now out of the forest. I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and I am frequently looking back to make sure I'm not being followed. I'm in Crocs, mind you, so I'm hoping that if I have to book it out of there, I'd regret not being in sport mode from the get-go. I make it to the halfway point, and a sense of relief starts setting in, knowing I made it safely out of this very scary situation. But as I check behind me for the final time, I see something. Slowly creeping over the ramp is the naked man crawling on all fours, as if he was a primate walking. His head was positioned towards me, looking at me as he made his way into the middle of the paved walkway. He slowly gets up from his stance and starts standing on his feet, then positions his body to face me. After setting himself into his new position, the man starts running towards me. I freaking book it. I run as hard as I can down the path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket and I lost it, but I didn't care, because a whole ass naked man was chasing me at 11 p.m. at night in a secluded forest. I looked back for a split second, and the man was still running towards me, still completely naked. He could have my flashlight for all I care. I wanted to make it out of this situation alive. I finally make it out of the forest, and I run to my car, which is only 30 feet away from the end of the forest. I desperately get to my car, and like a classic horror movie, I fumble with trying to get my key fob to unlock my car. I even drop my keys and quickly think to myself, I'm actually dead, but I brush off the thought and pick them back up. I get my fob properly, unlock my doors, and throw my things into the back seat before getting into my car. This felt like an eternity, but in hindsight, most likely took 6 seconds altogether. As I try to guide my keys into the ignition, I am fixated at the end of the paved path that I was just at a few seconds ago, waiting to see if the naked man was coming still. I feel my key go into the ignition, and I switch my sights onto the road in front of me. Then I zoom out of the area as fast as possible. As I drive away, and I'm a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place, I get a call on my phone. It was my friends asking if I made it to the spot yet, and all I say to them is, "Guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you?" They pull up to my house because again, it was actually decently close to the campfire area, and I tell them the whole story the way I told it just now. They swear it was none of them trying to prank me or anything like that. I also knew none of them would try to full sprint at me with their dong out, but as we're standing in front of my house, there's a college student who looks like he's walking home that's going towards the direction of where I encountered a naked man. I just yelled out to him, "Yo, be careful. There's a naked guy that was chasing me by the bridge that crosses over the river." He responds saying, "Oh damn, really? I gotta go over that bridge to go home." All I tell him is, "Good luck, man." The next day I reported it to the police by phone, but they sent over an officer so I could tell them in person and show them where in the area I saw these things. When we went there where I initially saw the man hunched over, they said they didn't see any trace of anyone being there previously, but an officer said they would make note of it anyways, in case it happens again. Some of my friends say it was a skinwalker. Others say more realistically, it's either a homeless, mentally ill, or drunk/high person. One theory I've heard my friends say is that it's a future version of me pulling a prank on the past version of me. Honestly, if time travel is real, I would totally screw with my younger self like that. So that's the only crazy Let's Not Meet story I have. But damn, is it a story I will never forget. Boro The Gibbon. This happened in Thailand in 2014. I had lost my job in Zurich and decided to use the opportunity to make a trip around the world, starting with Southeast Asia. I have always wanted to work with animals, so after backpacking Vietnam and parts of Thailand, I applied for a volunteer position at an ape sanctuary. They told me I could start whenever I wanted. The deal was that I had to make a deposit of around 2,000 baht, and they told me that if I stayed for at least 3 months, I would get 70% of my money back. The early days of working there were wonderful. The place was full of young, motivated people who thought they could save the world, one ape at a time. The majority of the animals were rescued gibbons. Our goal was to nurse them back to health and eventually release them back into the wild. Our responsibilities as volunteers were to feed them, clean their cages, and educate visiting tourists about the horrors of the illegal pet trade in Thailand. Before they came to us, most of the gibbons had been abused as tourist attractions. You know those pictures you see on Facebook from people being on vacation somewhere in Asia, where they hold cute animals into the camera? This is how poachers make their money. They will put a gibbon, lizard, or slow loris on your shoulder, snap a picture, and charge you for it afterwards. I can tell you that every single one of those animals has been through hell, and was, or will be killed soon after the photo was taken. The thing is, poachers can only use the babies as tourist attractions, because as soon as they reach puberty, they become territorial and aggressive, and are then no longer of use to them. On average, to get a single baby, a poacher has to kill 15 other gibbons. This is because they are still attached to their mother at that age. The poachers will shoot her first. Then, they will shoot the father, because he will be trying to protect them. In most cases, the baby won't survive the fall from the trees, so the poachers have to kill a few more families until one baby lives. Then the real pain starts. They have their fangs ripped out without anesthetics, so they can't bite. They will be drugged so they stay awake during the night. When the tourists roam the streets, they will be chained so that they can't escape. They will be kept in tiny cages, fed the wrong food, and some will be taught to drink alcohol, or even smoke. And as soon as they are no longer of use, they will be left to die. The poachers will then go and find the next baby. As you can imagine, most of the gibbons in that sanctuary were pretty traumatized. But still, working with them was fascinating. They all had their own personalities, including little quirks, preferences, and biases. Most of them were shy. Some only tolerated men when near them. Some disliked girls with blonde hair, etc. One female took a particular liking to me. Every time I walked by her cage, she would start making furiously. Her boyfriend, who was kept in the same cage, didn't seem to care at all though. I spent my days cutting fruit, mixing cement, hosing poo down the drain, and getting bitten by mosquitoes. Even though it was hard labor without any real pay, it was probably one of the best times of my whole trip. We all felt like we were doing something selfless, something noble. It was truly a fulfilling experience. Then, one day, I was scheduled to work in the quarantine area. This is the place that tourists never get to see. It is the place where they kept the really bad cases, the gibbons that have been damaged beyond hope. They told me some of the things that have been done to them. Unspeakable horrors. All of them were either too sick, too weak, or too aggressive to ever be released back into the wild again. To be blunt, most of them were batshit crazy. First, there was Nini. She was hyperactive and showed self-mutilating behavior. You always had to feed her first. If she saw you give food to a different cage before hers, she would flip her shit, rip out her water container, throw herself down to the floor, and start biting her own arm. She was also kinda mean. The other volunteers had warned me that she would try to startle me. She would hide in a dark corner of her cage, or acting as if she was busy or sleeping. But as soon as you turned your back to her, she would jump at the bars right behind you, with this ear-piercing scream, and rattle the fence. I have dropped more food than one basket in this manner. After a few times of that happening, I got sick of her shit. I filled my mouth with water and walked closely by her cage, facing away, just far enough so that she could not reach me if she stuck her arm through the wire. As soon as I heard her move, I instantly turned around and spit the water at her. It did not hit her, but she never tried to scare me again after that. Then there was one who literally looked and behaved like a zombie. His name was Fanta. He had been blinded by an infection in both eyes. They were white and foggy. Big chunks of his fur had fallen out, giving him a very decrepit appearance. He never swung, only moved by slowly walking along the branches in his cage. You had to rattle his food basket during feeding time, so he would know when to come and eat. Another one was called Pam. She was special. They never told me what had happened to her, but she was missing one foot, one hand, and all but 2 fingers on her other hand. You had to cut up her food into really small pieces because she had a hard time eating. She was really old for a gibbon and very calm, yet there was something out of the ordinary in her eyes, something intelligent. She was the only gibbon we were allowed to touch. We had to, because we needed to apply cream and powder to her stump. She hated the powder though, and would only allow it if she got a little massage first. Like all the gibbons in this area, she was alone in her cage. I guess she was missing being groomed by a partner. A Thai worker told me a story about how some years ago, a volunteer who was going to clean her water container found it empty. That was unusual for Pam, because with only 2 fingers, she wasn't really able to drink that fast. He turned the container upside down, just to be sure, when a dark green scorpion fell out and crawled away. There were a few more apes in the quarantined area, whose names I have already forgotten, but there is one name that I will never forget. Boro. Boro was huge for a gibbon, and strong. If he managed to get a hold of your shirt, he could pull you to the cage and rip it right off your body with one pull. Same thing was true for tufts of hair. While most gibbons got really excited during feeding time, Boro was different. The first time I approached his cage, he didn't even come down to see what kind of food he would be getting. I could already hear him chew on something up in his cage. Black feathers were floating down from his branch. He had somehow managed to catch a bird, and Boro was one of the few gibbons who still had his fangs. There was also something wrong with his lungs. He was the only one you could actually hear breathing, and when he sang, which he did not do often, it had this weird rattling tone to it. Oh, and he was also infected with hepatitis. I can't remember which, and since he liked to throw poo around, his hands were sometimes covered in feces, so you'd better make sure not to let him scratch you. They had tried to find a girlfriend for him a few times, but it never worked out. It seemed like he just hated other gibbons, and for some reason, he really, really hated me. They had told me that Boro was not fond of new volunteers, but with me, it was a different level. For example, we used the water hose to clean the cages from feces. The water pressure was quite high, because after some time in the sun, the poo would be dry and really stick to the bars of the cage. Gibbons don't like to get wet. That's why most of them hid in one of the top corners while we did the cleaning. During those few minutes, I felt like I was in charge. I did not have to constantly cover my back. One mistake did not mean a new scratch or a urine stain. But to Boro, the hose meant nothing. Whenever I came close to his cage, he instantly tried to rip it from my hand. He didn't even care if he got soaked. He just cared about catching me or taking something away from me. Whenever I worked in quarantine, I could feel his stare. Whatever I did, he was watching me. Every single time I came close, he tried to grab me. He would hide in the shadows of his little house or behind some branches, then jump at the fence and reach through it. His claws were always exactly at face level, sometimes just a few inches away, grasping desperately. The Thai keepers told me that they had never seen behavior like that. One day, a huge spiderweb had appeared overnight, between a tree and a cage next to his, blocking my usual path. I'm not a fan of spiders, and I was behind on schedule, so instead of removing it, I tried going around it. This meant I had to get a little bit closer to Boro's cage than usual. I thought it was still far enough. It wasn't. I tried to squeeze past the tree with my back to his cage, and he caught the collar of my shirt. I was lucky that I was already holding on to the tree, otherwise he could have pulled me to the cage. I heard him hiss behind me as I managed to pull away, my shirt tearing, and me falling face first into the web. I took a little walk afterwards to calm myself down. When I returned, he was quietly sitting in the shadow of his house again, breathing this slow, rattling breath. That was the last time I ever saw him. The things I'm about to tell you next, I did not see with my own eyes, but the keepers told us at lunch a few days later. That morning, when the keepers and some volunteers arrived at the quarantine, they felt like there was something wrong. Gaboons usually sing, especially in the early hours of the day. You can hear them from miles away if they give it their all. But this morning, it was quiet. The first thing they noticed when they entered the area was a huge red puddle under Fanta's cage. What was left of him was hanging in the feeding area. They found parts of him in his food basket, outside of his cage, and on the ground. The second thing they noticed was that Boro's cage was empty. What had happened was that part where his house was screwed to the back of the cage had rusted, and combining his weight with his strength, he managed to rip it out and squeeze himself through the hole it left. Then he must have lured Fanta to the edge of the cage by rattling his food basket. None of the other Gaboons were hurt, fortunately. It was partially my fault that he had escaped. The volunteers were supposed to check the integrity of the cages at least once a week. The tool we used was a long stick with a metal hook on top. It should have been able to pull at the rusty parts of the grid to see if they still hold. But that type of work was a pain in the ass. The tool was heavy. The Gaboons would always go crazy and grab it. You had to go to the places in the area that were hard to reach, etc. So almost nobody cared to do it properly. The team they had to catch the Gaboons was literally one guy with a blow tube. He was actually a great guy. He taught us how to cook rice and bamboo, and he could climb a tree in seconds. But he was also an alcoholic. Almost every night he would down a bottle of Sang Som, and then try to find a new way into the woman's bungalow. Nobody really had any hopes of catching Boro again, unless he would return to his cage by himself, which some Gaboons before him actually did. From the moment they told me that Boro had escaped, working in the sanctuary became quite stressful for me. I always imagined him watching me from the trees outside. They went looking for him in the forest, but there was no trace. Not even once did we hear him sing in the distance. Still, every time a branch snapped somewhere behind the trees, I twitched. During the next week, we heard some of the tourists had been attacked by a wild Gaboon. They went out in the forest and looked for the culprit, but nothing ever came out of it. The following night, I was awakened by a familiar sound. At first I thought it was my roommate snoring. Then I realized it came from the window, which had no glass, only a mosquito net, a slow rattling breath. It was Boro. It was pitch black, but I'm sure it was him. He was holding his breath every couple of seconds, as if he wanted to be quiet so he could listen for something. I just laid there, trying not to make any sounds. I thought about what I was going to do if he decided to come inside. My plan was to use my blanket to shield my body. My roommate would surely help. After a few more moments, the rattling breathing stopped one more time. It never resumed. He was gone. The next day, I told our boss I was leaving, not only because of Boro, but some of the other people that I really liked were leaving too. I just felt like my time there was over. There were many more places in the world I wanted to see. I'm sure they were able to afford a few new cages with the money I left them, so I did not feel bad about my decision. I don't know if Boro ever returned to the sanctuary. When I think about it now, I just feel sorry for him. He was not evil, just a wild animal that had experienced more terrors than most of us can imagine.